across the southwest in particular, and some strong winds. Also a bit of a damp start across parts of Scotland and the far north of Northern Ireland, but actually in between those two zones of wet weather, well, there's a lot of dry weather to be had first thing, particularly across parts of northern England and the north of Wales. However, as we go through the day, those two wetter zones are going to sandwich together. So the front in the south will be making its way northwards across the Midlands, North Wales and into northern England, and some of that rain in the far north will also push a little bit further southwards as well. So turning cloudier in places where it starts bright, and there'll be some rain arriving too. In the southeast, things could turn a bit brighter later on, and with that mild air still, we're looking at temperatures peaking around 16 Celsius. Later on tomorrow evening, we're going to see that rain across central parts continuing to edge a bit further northwards into the far north of England and southern Scotland later on. As we go through into Thursday, well, it looks a bit mixed. A bit of rain for some, but some dry weather too. Friday, however, cold air in the north and heavy rain in the south.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
You could win your entire Christmas on us this year, all magically delivered to you in time for the big day. There's cash, £30,000 in tax-free cash to make your new year go with a bang. There's also a further £10,000 to spend on all the gifts. We've also got Christmas lunch for you, with £1,000 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. And finally, a festive GB News goodie bag, so there's something for everyone under the tree. For another chance to win, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB17 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 28th of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Daily Mail are going on a headline, woke gardens to tackle absenteeism, and stop asking people's questions, it makes them anxious. Now,
of course it makes you anxious. It's your job.
Yeah, so I mean, I get what they're going, and it's very easy to go with the popular view here. But I think they're not saying all pupils. They're asking to take into account that there may be, in certain sets of the classes, neurodivergent people, autistic, for whom it does make it up. So I do work with children who've been in care, and sometimes I've got people in the room who are autistic, and because I'm energetic and stuff, I've got to be very careful how I approach them. So sometimes, if I'm asking a question, I won't even look.
But Chris, I don't think that you can break up. You can sit and say, well, we've got Dawn, better not ask her that. Chris, I can't ask him this. And whatever. You know, you can't keep differentiating and cutting things up like that. I think you have to relook at what teachers are expected to do.
I think if we're preparing children for the outside world, we have to be tougher with them than we are. Now, you can't wrap them up in cotton wool.
Okay.
The world does not revolve around them. They have to toughen up, sorry.
And you will be asked questions in life.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. So are you saying then exclude them from the classroom so that you can concentrate on the main body?
But yes.
Okay. Well, okay. I mean, okay. That might be a solution. Well, so you go back to having schools that cater for.
You see, when people say questions make you anxious. Yes, I was anxious.
Yeah.
We all are. I was anxious. I was anxious when I went to the track, and as a World Cup athlete, I was still anxious when you go to the final. Yeah, we get that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
A really important thing about GB News, and it's brought something completely different to the landscape.
The mainstream is all about keeping the status quo as it is, ticking along quite nicely. They don't want to ask difficult questions.
GB News exists because there is a desperate need for fearless journalism that puts the people first.
GB News came on the scene as a disruptor, and it has always been a disruptor ever since.
Journalism in this country has been a cosy world full of groupthink, until now.
Well, the reality is that most British journalists are afraid. That's not GBNews.
Journalism is journalism at the end of the day, and we're not here to serve any masters. Our masters are our audience.
We're here to talk about things in a way that have never been broadcast on British airways before.
Do not miss a moment on GBNews.
The #1 news channel in the country.
Very, very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on yet another quiet news day. He jests here on GB News, broadcasting live across the UK, all the very latest news, debate and analysis all the way through until 6 p.m. And here's what's coming up on today's show.
We will thrive. We will thrive. And this narrative will not just be, given by our enemies.
In a barbed farewell speech today, the outgoing BBC Director General slammed the BBC's enemies, imploring staff they need to fight for their journalism. But his words, crucially, stopped well short of an apology to Donald Trump, who's poised to slam the Beeb with a $1 billion lawsuit on Friday. And after the BBC versus Donald Trump scandal, the Beeb has been dealt another huge blow. Today, GB News can exclusively reveal that Reform UK has sensationally pulled out of a planned BBC documentary called The Rise of Reform, due to be screened in January. Find out exactly why at 5:20 when I'll be joined by Reform UK's Lee Anderson. And locals in Epping were left gutted today after they lost a High Court bid to have asylum seekers kicked out of the Bell Hotel on their patch, as the Home Office once again put the well-being of asylum seekers before the safety of British citizens. And an exclusive JL Partners poll seen by GB News shows that the vast majority of Brits now back the mass deportation of illegal immigrants. In a huge blow for Sir Keir Starmer and a boost for Nigel Farage, a majority of voters of all of the big parties now back remigration. We've got the full details of this sensational poll exclusively in today's show, and that's all coming up. We've got so much in the show today, they're cutting me off. Reform UK have now pulled out of a BBC documentary in another huge political blow for the BBC. Lee Anderson will be exclusively spilling the beans on that one on today's show, plus a poll seen by GB News by JL Partners, as I just said. You remember, only a few months ago it was considered far right. It was considered an extreme position to back the mass deportation of illegal immigrants. Today, it's the new normal, or our political class completely and utterly out of touch. For decades, certainly since Brexit, they refused to listen to the British electorate. Now the electorate is getting calcified. Wake up and smell the coffee. The British people demand to be heard, and they want mass deportations. Let me know your thoughts. All the usual ways. Get in touch. gbnews.com/your say. But now it's time for your headlines, and here's Aaron Armstrong.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon to you. 3:02 here in the GB newsroom. The High Court has rejected an attempt to prevent asylum seekers being housed at a hotel in Essex. Epping Forest District Council had claimed the owners of the Bell Hotel were in breach of planning rules. Well, the court dismissed the claim, ruling an injunction was not an appropriate means of enforcing planning control. The hotel became the scene of protests earlier this year when a migrant living there was convicted of sexually assaulting a woman and a teenage girl. Mr. Justice Mould accepted the criminal behaviour of a small number of individual asylum seekers housed there had raised the fear of crime amongst locals. The Conservatives have said that the court had given a slap in the face to the people of Epping. The Home Office says the government will close every asylum hotel and are working to find alternative accommodation. 91 prisoners have been freed by mistake since April this year. That's according to new figures from the Ministry of Justice. It comes as David Lammy is set to face questions from MPs in the next half an hour or so over the issue amid mounting pressure on the government. Last week it emerged 2 prisoners were freed in error following the high-profile wrongful release of Hadish Kabatu, the now deported migrant at the heart of those protests in Epping. Some 262 inmates were mistakenly let out in the year to March 2025. That is an increase of 128% on the previous 12 months. Outgoing BBC Director General Tim Davie has told staff the corporation must stand up for its journalism. He was speaking 2 days after resigning over a controversy over the way a speech by Donald Trump was edited in a Panorama documentary. The US president has given the BBC until Friday to publish a full retraction or face a $1 billion legal action.
Seen the BBC go through very tumultuous times, and they can be discombobulating. You can ask questions of, where is the BBC going? Are we rudderless? What happens to the future? And they're stressful, they're difficult, and maybe one of my biggest emotions at the moment is I care desperately about the organisation. The thousands of people who work for it, with every cell of my body, I think are absolutely wonderful in what they do. And I think, we all need to be looking after each other and making sure we set everything in context.
Mr. Davie's comments come a day after that threat from President Trump, that legal action threat over what he says are false and defamatory statements made about him. Shadow Culture and Media Secretary Nigel Huddleston told GB News the BBC owes Mr. Trump a huge apology.
We were wrong, and Donald Trump has a perfectly legitimate concern here. Could be perceived to be misleading. It transparently was. Doctoring the video, but also the whole programme. There was issues. If you look at the number of people who were interviewed, it was 10 to 1, the people who opposed Donald Trump to those who supported him. And there wasn't a compensatory programme for Kamala Harris. So I think the president has some legitimate concerns. When they make an error, and when they have an error of judgment, which, by the way, the BBC chair has now admitted, they need to admit that they got it seriously wrong. What they did was mislead the public and give the impression that Donald Trump said something that he transparently did not.
Well, local government minister Alison McGovern says her constituents view the BBC as one of the most trustworthy media organisations.
I hope he is proud of the staff at the BBC, because I know that my constituents rely on and largely trust the BBC. It's one of our most trusted media organisations. And I would say, just as I was saying before a moment ago, if there actually have been editorial issues, the right thing is for the BBC to apply high journalistic standards and to get on and sort the problems out. If there are questions of, problematic edits or whatever, deal with the problems. I'm sure many people in media organisations like yourselves have experienced that. People should leave their political views at the door when they go into work as a journalism and ask the right questions and get to the truth.
UK unemployment has risen to 5% in the 3 months to September, its highest rate since early 2021, and it's higher than had been projected. The ONS, the Office for National Statistics, says average regular wage growth is also down 0.1%, and it's now the lowest seen since April 2022. The Work and Pensions Secretary Pat McFadden has accepted there are big challenges in the labour market, particularly when it comes to young people who aren't in work, training or education. The Queen and the Princess of Wales have been attending services to mark Armistice Day as events take place around the world. The Princess has been at a ceremony at the National Memoriam Arboretum in Staffordshire as the end of World War I was commemorated with a 2-minute silence. And Queen Camilla, well, she's been at Paddington Station in London for a wreath-laying ceremony, having travelled by train from Wiltshire. And the Prince of Wales has been delivering a video message to young people, sharing his views on the importance of wearing a red poppy, and to say that remembrance is for everyone.
When we remember, we connect with service in a personal way. And when we wear a red poppy or take a moment of silence, we are saying thank you. We have not forgotten, and we will not forget.
Up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with more at 3:30.
Thank you, Aaron. Now, the outgoing BBC boss Tim Davie today praised staff this morning and said the corporation must stand up for our journalism and insisted that it will control its own narrative, which will not just be given by our enemies.
We will thrive. we will thrive, and this narrative will not just be, given by our enemies. It's our narrative. I do hear everyone when we have to be very clear and stand up for our journalism. We are a unique and precious organisation.
Well, this comes just a day after the US President Donald Trump threatened to sue the corporation for $1 billion of the editing of his speech in a Panorama documentary. Well, let's now speak with GBNews national reporter Will Godley, who joins us from outside Broadcasting House. Will, welcome to the show. The storm has passed, or at least they'll be hoping, inside that building behind you. But Tim Davie going out in a blaze of glory. We did make a mistake and there was an editorial breach, but sorry seems to be the hardest word to say, and there's a billion reasons why that might be a wise word to say. Brings up to speed.
Well, Martin, yeah, that was a 40-minute call with all staff earlier on today. And I don't know about you, but normally when you receive an email saying there's an all-staff call, potentially people aren't really paying too much attention to what is said, but from what I've heard, many people paying attention to Tim Davie's words earlier on today. Of course, asked many questions from BBC staff and answering lots of those questions as well. And I can tell you some of the things he said in that call. He said that some mistakes have cost us, but also saying he's fiercely proud of this organisation that he will be leaving. Of course, he resigned on Sunday evening, and it seems like the dust has begun to settle after that bombshell resignation. I'm told that in the corridors, in the kitchens, people in the building behind me beginning to speculate about who could be taking on the next role of the Director General here at the BBC. As its current one, the outgoing one, Tim Davie told staff that they must fight for our journalism, and that fight, of course, will come in the form of the new Director General having to renew their charter, of course, which expires at the end of 2027. Tim Davie on the call said there was a very strong case for the BBC to get that charter renewed, but this charter, of course, will make with the BBC to do with their funding, be discussed with government about how they get their funding. And reporting today suggests that in the Telegraph that those conversations with the government are already taking place. Reporting saying that the government will have a comprehensive look at the way the BBC operates, including looking at how the licence fee is paid, potentially whether that is to do with a sustainable funding model for the BBC. Of course, that would provide a huge challenge for the next Director General if the funding model is going to change. The BBC get the majority of their funding from the licence fee, currently £174, but if that was to change, something for the next Director General to look at. People today tell me, though, that they are very sad to see Tim Davie go. They would like to see someone, whoever takes on this role of Director General, to be someone who champions the BBC as much as he did, and hopefully secure a charter for the BBC that secures their future into the future. That's the feeling here at BBC, Martin.
Thank you, Will Godley. A comprehensive update as ever. Thank you, my friend. Now, join me now back in the studio in Westminster. I'm joined by the Labour peer, Lord Steve McCabe, and also by the former BBC correspondent, Andrew Gilligan. Gentlemen, welcome. Andrew, I shall start with you. Fighting talk from Tim Davie there, the kind of words that Donald Trump might be quite proud of himself. We did make a mistake, but we've got to fight for our journalism, and we will not give in to our enemies. Is that really befitting of a Director General?
Look, he's just lost his job. I think he's probably entitled to be a bit upset. And I think I kind of broadly agree with him. The BBC is something we should preserve. Not perhaps in exactly its current form, but basically it's something that holds the country together. It's still one of the reasons why we haven't got the kind of level of polarisation we've got in America, for instance, is that you've still got kind of forums where people who think different ways about different things can meet, disagree about things in a kind of common frame of reference. The BBC is one of those places. It's made terrible mistakes in this. Not so much the errors of journalism, actually. That happens in any organisation. It's just the errors of management, the way that it let this drag on for so long before it put it right. And that's exactly what we saw, what we see in all BBC crises. That's the lesson the BBC needs to take from this.
Andrew, you say the BBC brings the country together. I wonder if that's any longer true. I think it did when I was a kid. When I was a lad, the BBC was a pillar, a bastion, a go-to, a trusted source. Is it anymore? A survey out today by YouGov, only 19% of those polled think the BBC isn't biased at all. Of course, people always say it's biased against their own leanings. 31% say it's towards the left, 19% towards the right. But the point is, only 19% of the viewers think it's impartial. It's its job to be impartial. It's failing in its duty to be impartial.
But they still watch it. It still commands a kind of big share of the audience. And, you know, you can argue it's too powerful, you can argue it's too much of a £1,000 gorilla, but it's a lot less powerful than it was. And I do think there is something important in having these places. You know, obviously the days when everyone watched the same TV, 3 TV channels are gone, streaming's come in, social media's come in, upstart channels like GBNews have come in. Now, you've demonstrated your power as a medium by bringing the grooming story back up the agenda. So the BBC hasn't got the place to itself anymore, and that's good. But it's still quite a big part of the national debate, and I think that's important.
Andrew Gilligan, superb. Let's bring in Lord Steve McCabe now. Lord McCabe, the next conversation, of course, will be should the BBC carry on with its privileged position of having enforced payments in form of the licence fee. Lisa Nanley is giving a statement later on in the show. We'll be live for that in the Commons. The Charter is up for renewal. Surely all of this mess, all of this scandal shows us we need to put the BBC to the market. Let the public decide if it's worth paying for.
Well, I think if you choose to do that, you're saying you want to end the BBC as we recognise it.
What's wrong with that? A healthy market. We pay for what we like
I
these
think
days.
it's a bit like the same argument about why don't we just privatise the NHS. I mean, if you want a totally market-driven process, then fine. I think I would say, I agree with Andrew, actually. I think the management of some of the things that's going on has been a bit of a disaster, and I think it would have been a bit more becoming if the Director-General, however sore he feels, had been a bit more apologetic about what has gone on. And in fact, if it is true the news division had planned an apology and the board blocked it, then we should hear from the people on the board about why that's happening. So I think there's a very good argument for looking at how the BBC has got into this mess. Seems to me it's largely around the news and current affairs division. You know, if you look at something like Traitors the other night, it had a massive viewing figure. So it still produces highly popular television and does it really well. But we should know how they got into this mess. We should look at that. And I think it's time they started learning some lessons. And while I wouldn't want to move away from the licence fee model, I do wonder whether there's enough consideration of viewers and representation of what viewers are thinking in the way the board and the management currently operate.
Let me put a question to you might not like, but that's my job. The Labour Party won't overhaul the Royal Charter. They won't overhaul the licence fee because the BBC is institutionally biased towards supporting the left, and that's the way the Labour Party wants to keep it.
Yeah, during the years I was in government with Labour, that wasn't the view that was held then. In fact, absolutely not. Look, I think it doesn't really matter. I think both sides say the BBC is wrong. What matters is how accurate they are, and on this occasion they got it badly wrong and they should have put their hands up very quickly, and they have largely created this mess for themselves.
OK, well, I suspect this story still has more legs to come. Andrew Gilligan, Lord Steve McCabe, excellent start show. Thank you both for joining me in the studio today. Now, moving on, the jobs market in the UK is showing signs of weakness as unemployment has risen once again to 5% in the 3 months to September, and that's the highest level in over 4.5 years. In fact, since the grim old days of COVID lockdowns. Well, wage growth has also slowed, adding further pressure on workers across the country. Let's now speak with our political commentator and independent statistician, Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, welcome to the show. You sent this through to me this morning, and straight away you said, terrible news for the Chancellor. Tell us more.
Yeah, good afternoon, Martin. So this is clearly not the news the Chancellor wants ahead of a budget. So if we break down what happened then, if we look at before the general election last year, what we've seen is that 170,000 people have come off the payroll. So that's the most robust way of looking at kind of the jobs market, looking at the payroll rather than looking at some surveys. So 170,000. And the most damning part of that is when you break it down by different age groups in different regions, you can see that we've seen 220,000 losses among people under 35. So it's young people really being affected here. You look across the country, where I live in Wales and London, where you were broadcasting from, they've had the biggest kind of percentage job cuts over the last 18 months. And most interesting, when you really break down very granular, Westminster has actually had the biggest percentage job cut. So when you look at these figures, maybe we could do with a couple of cuts from the Chancellor and the Prime Minister ahead of in the future.
On a serious point, November the 26th is a date that many have as a black cross in their diaries now, surely no more so than the Chancellor. Wiggle room is running out whichever way she looks.
Yeah, and one of the things I was looking at last week is what's that wiggle room that she's got, because the OBR will update their forecasts. And if we go back to, say, before the general election, when the OBR did their pre-election forecast last March in 2024, they were forecasting, it's still a staggering amount of money, £102 billion, 102.6 to be precise, borrowing from August to September under Rachel Reeves. But they've had to revise that, and what we've seen, actually, the figures that they've actually borrowed was 194.4 billion. So the Chancellor has borrowed 92 billion more than what the OBR were predicting before the election. Now, that's far more than this mysterious black hole she says she inherits from the kind of the Conservative Party. And that's where the wiggle room's not there. But the difficulty you've got, Martin, is if you put income taxes up or taxes on jobs, and the tax on jobs is a factor in why we're seeing these really poor figures on the employment stats today. When you've got 180,000 people fewer on payroll, that's less tax coming in, more money has to be spent on benefits. So putting the tax up and up and up is actually not working, but she's not going to do a U-turn because she's kind of entrenched in what you've got. And the graphic on the screen, you can see there is basically, for those listening on the radio, it's just showing basically blobs and blobs of red negative since the election. Jobs were actually going up before the general election, and they've come down quite significantly since.
Yeah, only 15 days to go. Jamie Jenkins, I think a lot of people will be looking through their fingers at their diaries, bracing for impact. November the 26th, the day. Jamie Jenkins, thank you as ever for making the difficult stuff easy to understand. Always a pleasure. Now, still to come, well, shortly we're hearing from the Justice Secretary, David Lammy, over accidental prison releases. You would not want to miss it. And also next, locals in Epping were left gutted today after they lost a High Court bid to have asylum seekers kicked out of the Bell Hotel on their patch. This is GB News with me, Martin Daubney, on Britain's #1 news channel.
Britain was once the envy of the world. But look around. A nation that no longer knows what it is or where it's going. A country that's broken. How do we fix Britain? How do we bring it back? Friday night with Matt Goodwin at 8 p.m, only on GB News.
Decisions made in Washington aren't just shaping America, they're shaping Britain too. From migration to global security, from crime to health. Whatever happens in the White House today
will be felt in your town or city tomorrow.
That's why The Late Show is live from Washington, D.C.
Cutting through the politics to show you what it all means for Britain.
The Late Show live every night at midnight.
Only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News.
Britain deserves a newsroom that puts the facts and your voice first.
Well, and that's what you get on GB News. Lively debates, lively conversations.
And we're not afraid to hold power to account.
And each other. So join me, Andrew Pearce.
And me, Miriam Gates, for Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 on GB News.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, But every Friday night at 9 p.m, you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back. It's 3:25. You're with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, Essex Council has lost its bid for a High Court injunction to block asylum seekers from being housed in the Bell Hotel in Epping. And let's now speak with GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. In a sense, crushing inevitability here. The locals, the odds were always stacked against them because if Epping won, then that would open the floodgates all around the country, surely.
Yeah, I mean, we've been already hearing from a few locals in Epping since this ruling was handed down, and there is a sense, despite the inevitability, of real anger and frustration here. But as you say, I think they were prepared for the likelihood that this ruling would go against them, given what the Court of Appeal had said in August there when they overturned the original temporary injunction, saying that that was flawed in principle, that original decision. I think we can show you some live images actually this afternoon of the Bell Hotel in Epping. The police presence turning up at some point to make their voices heard. There had been real hope following that initial injunction, temporary injunction that was granted, that this could be a way forward in trying to end the use of asylum seeker hotels right across the country. That has been blown out of the water now by this decision today. There's been reaction from the politicians too. Sadly, I think it's turned into the inevitable unseemly row. We've been hearing from Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary. He said that this was a dark day for democracy going on. The people of Epping have been silenced in their own town. Their council fought for them. Their voices were ignored. Labour's lawyers fought tooth and nail to keep this hotel open, even after a migrant housed there was jailed for sexually assaulting a teenage girl. Well, a Labour source has responded to that. They say, this is some brass neck from Chris Philp. If he wants to understand why there are so many asylum seekers in hotels, I suggest he casts his mind back to his time in the Home Office. He was the one opening all these hotels. Or perhaps he could ask why the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, bragged about ramping up their use. Listen, I think, Martin, that the last thing that the people of Epping and elsewhere in the country who are really concerned about the asylum problem within hotels right up and down this nation want to hear is this, war of words between politicians. They want some action to stop the use of hotels to house asylum seekers.
Well, Mark, I'd go further, and I would say that the people of Epping and the people of Great Britain would say a plague on both your houses, because it is true. The Conservatives started this policy of rolling out hotels. It's also true the Labour Party is saying they would end it, have ramped them up. And it's also true that that particular hotel, of course, housed Hadush Kabati, who was paid £500 to clear off to Ethiopia after sexually assaulting a schoolgirl. This decision today doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the government, it doesn't help the public, it doesn't give us any clarity, and it certainly won't stop the boats coming in.
No, listen, it's a complete mess, and I don't think there's any way out of it for the government. They are trying, they say, to stop the use of asylum hotels, and they've vowed in the year or two ahead that they will end the use of these asylum hotels. But what's their alternative plan? Well, they're going to put many people into houses of multiple occupancy in a street near you. They're also going to put them in military sites, disused industrial sites, but they will, even though they will be housed in these more austere conditions up and down the country, they will still be free to come and go and to mingle in communities with all the concerns of potential criminality and worse that brings to local people. The only real solution to the accommodation crisis is stopping them coming in the first place. And of that, there appears to be no solution, as again over the weekend, we saw more than 2,000 migrants arrive when weather conditions improved enough to allow that flow across the channel.
Mark White, later in today's show, I've got an astonishing poll. It's exclusive to GB News from our friends at JL Partners. 66% of all Britons now support the notion of deporting all illegal immigrants, and that rises to 81% if they commit criminality. Mark White, the public mood is changing, and it's changing very quickly, and it just strikes me time and time and time again, particularly with decisions like today in Epping, we have a political class utterly out of touch with public mood.
There's no doubt about that. The chattering classes like to describe it as the Overton window, but there is no doubt that the public mood with regard to what they are willing to tolerate in terms of illegal immigration into this country has run out. People are now just fed up to the back teeth of what has been happening, because they're seeing it in communities right across the country, the net result of all these, mainly, let's face it, young men entering the country in their very many thousands, and the criminality that we're seeing as a result of that. Those that, of course, support migration and asylum seeker rights will point to the fact that there's criminality in this country from the indigenous population. That is true. But we didn't invite these people to come over into this country in the first place, and the fact that they're here and adding to criminality in this country and the very significant cost that people in this country are having to pay to house these people is just something that people are utterly fed up with now.
You know, Mark White, a lot of people are starting to think this country puts the rights of asylum seekers before the rights of British citizens, and I think this decision today underlines that in the minds of many people. Mark White, superb as ever. Thanks for joining me on the show today. Thank you. Now, lots more still to come between now and 4 p.m, including we'll shortly be hearing live from the Justice Secretary, David Lammy, over those accidental prison releases. You won't want to miss it. The first...
The headlines with me, Aaron Armstrong. Yes, let's get you up to date with what has been going on today. Asylum seekers can continue living at an Essex hotel after a council lost a landmark legal battle to remove them at the High Court. Epping Forest District Council sought to block migrants lodging at the Bell Hotel in Epping by arguing its owner had flouted planning rules. Ministry of Justice says 91 prisoners were released by mistake in the year up to October. Justice Secretary David Lammy is set to face questions from MPs in the next few minutes over a number of high-profile blunders. Donald Trump has threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion over the editing of his speech in a Panorama documentary. His legal team's accusing the corporation of defaming the US president and has demanded a retraction, giving the BBC until Friday to respond. Latest data from the Office for National Statistics shows unemployment has risen to 5% in the 3 months to September, and wage growth has fallen. And today obviously marks Armistice Day. We're commemorating the end of World War I in 1918, all of those who have died in armed conflict since. And we will have more on that coming up a little bit later.
Tune into GB News Radio wherever you are. Online, on DAB digital radio, on TuneIn, on Radio Player, and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News.
Hello again, very good afternoon to you. I'm here with your GB News weather update from the Met Office. More rain to come for many of us through the next couple of days, and it is staying exceptionally mild for most as well. Currently, we're trapped in a warm sector with a warm front pushing its way northwards across parts of Scotland and a cold front sweeping in from the west. Both these frontal systems, they're bringing a fair amount of rain as we go through the end of today and overnight into tomorrow, but a lot of it is clearing away towards the north and pushing further east. As a result, there will be some drier, clearer weather developing across southern parts of Scotland, northern parts of England and Wales, and also much of Northern Ireland. Where we get these clearer skies, the drier weather, it could turn a little fresh, a little chilly for some, but most places will stay pretty mild. Some places only dropping to around 12 or 13 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow then, it's a wet start across many parts of the south and the southeast. That front lingering here, rainfall totals building up across the southwest in particular, and some strong winds. Also a bit of a damp start across parts of Scotland and the far north of Northern Ireland, but actually in between those two zones of wet weather, well, there's a lot of dry weather to be had first thing, particularly across parts of northern England and the north of Wales. However, as we go through the day, those two wetter zones are going to sandwich together. So the front in the south will be making its way northwards across the Midlands, North Wales and into northern England, and some of that rain in the far north will also push a little bit further southwards as well. So turning cloudier in places where it starts bright, and there'll be some rain arriving too. In the southeast, things could turn a bit brighter later on, and with that mild air still, we're looking at temperatures peaking around 16 Celsius. Later on tomorrow evening, we're going to see that rain across central parts continuing to edge a bit further northwards into the far north of England and southern Scotland later on. As we go through into Thursday, well, it looks a bit mixed. A bit of rain for some, but some dry weather too. Friday, however, cold air in the north and heavy rain in the south.
Thank you, Britain, for making us the fastest growing news website in the nation. Because the truth matters, and so do you.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. The M8 is partially blocked westbound at Junction 19 Kingston Bridge due to a broken down vehicle. On the A55, high winds are affecting the Britannia Bridge until further notice. In Derbyshire, there are currently 15-minute delays on the A38 southbound between the A5 and the junction with the A5 132 due to congestion. In Wokingham, there has been a road traffic collision on the M4 eastbound between Junction 11 and Junction 10, closing 2 out of 4 lanes. On the trains, there is major disruption to both Gatwick Express services and Great Northern services. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Time is 3:36 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now I'm joined in the studio by GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley, as very shortly David Lammy will be making a statement to the MPs in the House of Commons. Before we go over there, Olivia, what can we expect? I mean, we know so far there's a lot of hoo-ha about early release data has come out today. David Lammy's blamed everybody but himself. He's blamed the Conservatives. He's blamed the prison system. He's blamed prison wardens. And it gets worse. What can we expect to hear from the Deputy PM today?
Well, there are a lot of separate things going on here, but of course they're all interlinked. We have the release of that foreign offender, which James Cartledge asked about last week in Deputy PMQs. He asked the same question 6 times and failed to get any answer from David Lammy. We subsequently discovered that David Lammy actually had a pre-prepared statement in front of him explaining what happened with the accidental release of this prisoner, but he chose not to use it. And then Number 10 was absolutely blindsided. They had no idea about this release. So we're expecting David Lammy to make the statement today, which he probably should have made last week about that escaped prisoner. At the same time, we have this story in The Telegraph about female prisoners being moved out of prisons and into secure accommodation to make space for male prisoners, because the male prisoner population is overflowing. There just isn't enough space in prisons. might sound like quite a sensible idea. The only issue is that the cost of housing a female prisoner in secure accommodation rather than a prison is almost twice as much. We're talking about between £60,000 and £100,000 per year for that, compared to about £37,000 to house one in a prison. So that's pretty controversial in itself. Not to mention the fact that the way this story came out, why it's in the Telegraph, is because Robert Jenrick was accidentally sent it by a member of MOJ staff. So I think that David Lammy can expect a little bit of heat from that this afternoon as well. Keir Starmer also isn't happy with the Deputy Prime Minister because he was blindsided about the accidental release of this prisoner. I suspect that had Keir Starmer not lost his last Deputy Prime Minister in such ignominious circumstances not very long ago, he probably would have sacked David Lammy. As it was, Lammy has managed to cling on to his job. But one way or another, it is looking like the prison system and the Justice Secretary too are in crisis. Oh, another issue which I should mention is that this early prisoner release scheme, which has caused a lot of controversy, it's not just, minor offenders. That's a bit of a misnomer. There are also people like serious sexual offenders and people who've been convicted of domestic abuse who've been released after just serving 40% of their sentence. David Lammy is considering bringing in a new early release scheme, which would bring that down to just 30% of the sentence. All sorts of issues facing the Justice Secretary at the same time. It should be an interesting justice statement.
On your screens there, you can see Lee Anderson. Just to remind you, he's going to be joining me in the studio at 5:20 to give the full exclusive inside story of why Reform UK today have dramatically pulled out of participating in a BBC documentary due to be screened in January called The Rise of Reform. Reform decided to withdraw their services, as I understand it, having already completed some filming. Quite a sensational story. We'll have that on the show in the 5 o'clock hour. But just to remind you, we are awaiting to hear from David Lammy, who's presently on his feet. And I noticed his pop is in the wrong place again. Last time he forgot it. Now, of course, that green leaf should be worn at the 11 o'clock position to mark 11. Let's go to Mr. Lammy now.
What binds us together, our belief in service and pursuit of the common good. Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, the 5th of November, I answered Prime Minister's questions. As someone who served in this House for 25 years, I take my responsibilities to Parliament incredibly seriously. The House will recall that I was asked repeatedly whether any asylum-seeking offender had been released in error. At that time, I had been alerted of the release of Brahim Kadur Sharif from HMP Wandsworth. Details about the case were still emerging throughout Wednesday. Importantly, my officials had not had confirmation about whether or not he was an asylum seeker. Indeed, it was not until later that afternoon that the Home Office confirmed to the Ministry of Justice that he was not. Given the nature of the opposition's question, I made a judgment that I would wait until I had all the detail, rather than risk giving an inaccurate or incomplete or misleading picture to the House about a sensitive case. Members opposite may argue that they would have handled the situation differently. All I can do is be open about the factors I was weighing at the time, and that the data in the system we inherited is painfully slow. I thank the Speaker for the opportunity to update the House in full today. Members will recall that following the release of Hadoush Kabatu on the 24th of October, I put in place stronger release checks. I can confirm that the error leading to Mr. Kadur Sharif's release happened in September, before those checks came in. He was charged with burglary at Snaresbrook Crown Court, and a warrant was issued to HMP Pentonville for his remand. Contrary to the set-down process, it was then forwarded by email to HMP Wandsworth when Mr. Kadur Sharif was transferred. However, staff did not pick it up, and he was released on the 29th of October. Mr. Kadur Sharif was taken back into custody on the 7th of November by Haringey Police. I'm grateful to officers from my part of North London again after they also rearrested Mr. Kabatu. I'm grateful too to the wider Metropolitan Police and the public who assisted them. I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, that in the year to March 2025, there were around 57,000 routine releases from prison. In that same time, there were 262 releases in error from prison. New data my department published today shows that from April to the end of October this year, there were 91 releases in error from prison. Further data on the breakdown of offences are official statistics that need to be combed through in detail before being put into the public domain. This was not a publication due today, but we recognise the public interest in being transparent about the overall number. It's important to note that this may be revised as additional cases are subsequently recorded, but this is the very latest that I have been provided. We understand that there are 3 mistakenly released prisoners currently lawfully at large. Their prison records show none of these are convicted sex offenders. I have been informed, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon that HMPPS are investigating a further case of a potential release in error on the 3rd of November who may still be at large. It is symptomatic of the data issues we inherited that all this information I have been given at this time while police and HMPPS investigate. Of the confirmed cases, Case 1 was in prison for failing to surrender to the police and released in error in December 2024. Case 2 was in a prison for a Class B drug offence and released in error in August 2024. And Case 3 was in prison for aggravated burglary and released in error in June 2025. 2 are a British national and 1 is a foreign national offender. I will not provide any further details on individual cases. In each case, we have to consider the welfare of victims and the judgment of our law enforcement agencies. Of the 262 releases in error from prison in the year to March 2025, 87 were of offenders whose main offence was violence against the person, and 3 whose main offence was a sexual offence. I'm clear that we must bear down on these numbers, which are symptomatic of a prison system under horrendous strain. As the Shadow Justice Secretary admitted last week, the state of the prison service has been unacceptable for a very long time, including under the Conservative government. Prisons today are still struggling with violence. The safety and custody statistics show an 8% rise in the rate of assaults in the year to June 2025. Systems are archaic. Every prisoner's sentence is worked out on paper, considering the type of offence and the legislation covered by it. Mr. Speaker, there are more than 500 pages of sentence management guidance. Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to prison officers doing an incredibly important job. But as the Prison Officers Association has said, prisons throughout the country are underfunded, they're understaffed, and they're operating under relentless strain. Frontline prison officers were cut by a quarter between 2010 and 2017. That's around 6,000 fewer people, and means that there are less experienced staff, which places more pressure on the system. And unsurprisingly, mistakes happen in those circumstances. Indeed, from 2010-11 to the end of 23-24, under the previous government, there were 860 known releases in error from prison. We must recognise the distress caused to victims, knowing that the person who harmed them is free when they should be behind bars. In the worst cases, like William Fernandez back in 2021, prisoners have committed further horrific offences. I give an unequivocal apology to all who have faced worry or worse as a result of releases in error, especially Hadush Kabatu's victims, who I'm offered to meet. I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman... Mr. Speaker, I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite will join me in that apology to all who have suffered because of releases in error under this and previous governments. Mr. Speaker, human error will always exist, and no Justice Secretary could prevent every mistake. But we must reduce the risk and reverse the trend over the course of this Parliament. But we must be honest, the release process requires a radical overhaul, and establishing the facts in individual cases is complex. Decisions about public statements rightly rest with the police. Issuing details too early could frustrate covert inquiries or put police officers or the public at risk. These are judgments for experienced operational leaders, and parliamentarians must give them the space to make them. Mr. Speaker, this is a complex issue. We must be straight with the public about that, and I'm clear that we have a mountain to climb in response. So first, I'm chairing a new Justice Performance Board. It will give a comprehensive view of prisons and criminal court performance, including releases in error, to drive a step change in how we respond. The first monthly meeting took place yesterday. Secondly, I'm making sure we understand the issues. Following the release of Kabatu, I asked Daubney Owens to carry out a review. This will conclude by the end of February next year. It will now include the adequacy of data collected and published on releases in error, and we fully expect to uncover additional incidents. I can also announce that we will set up a team of data scientists to review historic releases in error to understand what's going wrong. Third, I'm improving processes, because some of these errors actually originated not in the prison process, but in the court process. I will implement an urgent warrant query unit supported by court experts so that prisons can escalate queries and get rapid clarifications to reduce the risk of releases in error that emanate from the court system. We're also issuing instructions to court staff to reinforce mandatory requirements for imprisoned orders, to be confirmed verbally with judges before finalising a measure which has been shared with the judiciary. The court and the prison service are also scoping a joint exercise to look at live warrants, initially taking place within the London region. It will identify errors and ensure prisoners are subject to the correct warrants. Fourth, I'm accelerating upgrades. I stood up a digital rapid response team last week to reduce human error with cutting-edge technology. Over the next 6 months, we will provide up to £10 million to deliver AI and technology solutions to help frontline staff avoid mistakes and support them to calculate sentences accurately. Finally, I'm simplifying the release policy. One of the aims of the sentencing bill is to standardise how cases are treated, and following Daubney Owens' review, we will consider whether amendments are required to operational policy. These are the initial steps to address the issue, but I will update the House where further changes are necessary. I commend this statement to the House.
Right, can I just clear something up? And it's not got to happen. First of all, I was told Justice Secretary needed 13 minutes. Just bear with me. And I said, look, you need to ask. And in the end, the department came back and said, oh no, it's 10. It then wasn't 10, it was almost 12 minutes. I will work with Ministers and Secretary of State, but it is 10 minutes. If there needs to be an extension, please ask, don't keep changing the times, because in the end, it is unfair to shadow ministers when it goes over. So what I would say is, you've got an extra minute, you've got an extra half a minute, but please, stick to the rules of 10. If you do need longer, I am always sympathetic as long as I know in advance. But to have this conversation with the department that it was no longer needed makes your department look foolish, and it certainly am not going to make me look foolish in the future. Shadow Justice Secretary.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're back here again then. At least the Justice Secretary gets some use out of his new suit. But But where has Wednesday's bombast and bravado gone? Get a grip, man, he thundered last week, without even a hint of irony. None of that today, was there? And why is that? Well, it's because, like increasing numbers of criminals in our jails, the Justice Secretary just doesn't know whether he's coming or going. Even his colleagues in government are now turning on him, some with unbridled contempt. The handling is terrible, was the verdict of a cabinet minister. Just rank incompetence. Cowardly. Frankly, pretty dodgy, was the verdict of another. Before long, the Prime Minister will be saying he has full confidence in him. And we all know what that means. Look, 2 weeks ago, he came to the House and he said he had put in place the strongest checks ever to stop releases in error. 48 hours later, another prisoner with a history of sex offences was released in error. 7 days later, and a fraudster is let out the very day he was sentenced to 45 months inside. And today, he admits that he's lost another prisoner that same day. They're Lammy's lags, a whole new category of criminal who can just waltz out of prison despite having the strongest ever checks introduced by this Justice Secretary. The public are being endangered as this circus rumbles on, week after week, with no end in sight. When will he put a stop to it? He can't just hide behind the inquiry that he's commissioned. He couldn't even get the head of the review, Lynn Owens, name right last week. Anne Owens. Anne Owens, he bellowed. Well, I looked her up, and the only Anne Owens I could find was a panto performer who recently appeared in Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps she was the one who gave him some tips on his performance at the dispatch box last week. The former Chief Inspector of Prisons says that this has been caused, at least in part, by the confusion created by Labour's botched early release scheme. Does he now concede that there is a link between the doubling of prisoners accidentally released in the last year and the introduction of their SDS 40? Or is it just an extremely unlucky coincidence? Don't take us for fools. And Mr. Speaker, when will he finally come clean? He won't provide details in parliamentary questions. He won't answer even when he is here for Prime Minister's questions. He won't respond to letters. Well, perhaps that's because they weren't addressed to the Deputy Prime Minister. He's now been dragged here, kicking and screaming, to admit that one prisoner has been on the run from this Labour government for 14 months, and 91 have been accidentally released over the last 7 months. But the Justice Secretary is so clueless, he's literally lost track of how many prisoners he's lost. He says today a prisoner may have been accidentally released last Monday. Well, has he looked? He's either in his cell or he's not. What a complete and utter farce he's presiding over. As we all suspected, the crisis on his government's watch is even bigger than he dared admit. That's why he wouldn't say anything last week. Prisoners are being accidentally released nearly every other day and putting our constituents, his constituents, at risk. At this rate, he's on track for 156 prisoners to be accidentally released this year, which would be a record were it not for the doubling his government managed to achieve last year under their watch. And in his statement today, he poses more questions than he manages to answer. How many crimes were committed by those prisoners whilst they were on the run? Why can't he tell us who these 91 prisoners are? Who is the foreign criminal? And who is this mystery fourth offender he may have lost? How can he possibly be found if the public don't have his face? They don't have his name, like they did for Sharif and Kabatu. The public deserve to know the truth. And this situation could not be any more serious. There's been a 9-fold increase in the number of violent offenders accidentally released in the last year. A 9-fold increase. The criminal justice system, under his watch, has been made to look a total mockery. The public are being put at risk. In his own words, Mr. Speaker, it's time for him to get a grip or go.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a crisis that we inherited in our prison system. And it's worthy of sober reflection because he knows, Mr. Speaker, that when they were in government, there were 17 prisoners released in error every month. He knows that. He knows too because the former Conservative Justice Secretary said on the issue last Friday, we essentially run our prisons regime very hot. We are very close to capacity. We have seen a big increase in the prison population over the last 20 years, and resources have not necessarily matched that. That is the first problem. And another former Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, said part of the issue is we can't hold on to prison officers without that expertise. Errors creep in. And he himself also challenged their record in office. So he knows that this is a cross-party issue that, of course, we have to grip. Now, I said that I put in place those checks, and I stand by the checks that I put in. I also said in my statement, that the cases that we are uncovering, many of them occurred before those checks were in place, and another case involved an error that was in the court system, and that's why this new query process is very important indeed. And it is the case that we had to introduce SDS 40, and he knows why that's the case, because his government, just in the last few months in office, made 3 different changes to their early release scheme. So worried were they about prison capacity, a prison capacity issue that we inherited. He knows 500 extra places in the prison system is all that they built in 14 years in office, 14 years, and we've pledged 14,000 by 2031. He also knows, like night follows day, if you cut officers by almost 50%, is what they did in office, you cut those officers, and then you recruit new officers, as we've attempted to do. These are very junior people working hard, and I thank them for all that they're doing. But in those circumstances, mistakes will be made. I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this, really, really important. I've put in place the digital team because he knows also that this is a system based on human beings, therefore you get error. Only technology will fix this issue over time. And I've now put in place this double check between the court and the prison system.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the initiatives the Lord Chancellor has announced to deal with the...
Hey, welcome back to the show. It's 2 minutes past 4. That was David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, addressing Commons, being lambasted by his counterpart, Shadow Justice Minister Robert Jenrick. What did we learn? We learned quite a lot there, actually. And the headline from that, there may be another prisoner at large. Another one. Simply vanished into Britain. We learned that this lag has been at large since the 3rd of November. That's 8 days. 8 days now. Somebody else has been swanning around Britain. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they did. David Lammy wouldn't tell us. The details, he said, need to be combed through. But he did assure us that none are convicted sex offenders, but did concur that one of them is a foreign national. I'm clear this needs to be tackled, Mr. Lammy said, before adding, we have a mountain to climb. Robert Jenrick wasted no opportunity of steaming in. He said, "So we're back here again. Get a grip, man," he thundered. The strongest checks ever last week didn't even happen. David Lammy said at the very start that the sex offender who was released, Brahim Kadir Sharif, don't worry, he was released before those tough new checks came into operation. Nothing to see here. Olivia Utley, you watched through that, as I did. Our jaws were on the table. The blunders seem to be baked into this system.
I mean, I think what's particularly astonishing about this prisoner who was perhaps released on the 3rd of November is that we don't know for sure whether or not he was released. That's the point that Robert Jenrick made when he answered, well, has the Justice Secretary had a look? Is he in his cell or not? That was a question that David Lammy didn't want to answer. He pointed out that this is a problem that has been going on since before Labour was in power, and he made a point of referring to a criminal called William Fernandez, who was released in 2021 and committed a heinous crime while he had escaped from prison. So it is fair of David Lammy to point out that this isn't just a problem for Labour, but still, Robert Jenrick is right to say there has been a 9-fold increase, 262 prisoners released in error to March 2025 and another 91 released between April and October, 3 of whom are still on the run. David Lammy gave a bit of detail about what those prisoners had been released for. Robert Jenrick asked him in advance whether any of them had been locked up for sexual offences. None had been locked up for sexual offences. There was a prisoner who Class B drug offence, aggravated burglary and offence against an individual. Two are British nationals, one is a foreign national, but that's all we know. We don't know their names. Now, yesterday, Robert Jenrick wrote a letter to David Lammy saying that if he couldn't answer 3 questions, one of which was, who are these people, then he should resign. Let's see if David Lammy takes him up on that.
They're Lammy's lags, said Robert Jenrick, a whole raft of prisoners who just waltz out of jails. It's a circus, and it's now endangering the public. And when pressed on this matter, David Lammy responded, "This is a situation we inherited." He knows there were 17 mistaken releases every month under the Conservative watch. And Olivia Utley, I wonder if a lot of people watching all this pantomime, because that's what it is now, just think, a plague on both of your houses. People are being released. The public are being put at danger. This seems to be systemic. No one seems to have a grip, and all they do is throw mud at each other.
Well, absolutely. And I think that, the Conservatives obviously do have to take some of the blame for the mess that the justice system is in, although it is fair of Robert Jenrick to point out that now Labour has been in power for over a year and a half, and things certainly haven't got any better. Moving forward, David Lammy is setting up some sort of justice programme. We hear of these things all of the time. There will be perhaps more stringent checks in place, but the stringent checks don't seem to be working if a prisoner escaped on the 3rd of November. That was just 8 days ago and may or may not still be at large. It is a really, really extraordinary situation. And as you say, I think lots of viewers will be thinking, well, you just both seem to be as bad as each other. And perhaps we've heard press conferences from Reform about 3 times a week for the last few weeks. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the next one is on justice and fixing the prison service. And I think the public will be quite interested to hear what Reform have to say.
Olivia Utley, I just think it's still staggering to have heard there that there is now an extra lag at large who's been at large for 8 days. We don't know his name. We don't know what he did. We don't know what he's from. We certainly don't know where he is. We don't even know if it's a he. What we do know is that they seem to have no grip on who is where, at what time, and I think the public listening into this will have every right to think they're losing the plot and their safety is being put at risk. Olivia Utley, you can still see their debate in Parliament raging on another committee, more recommendations, more tough checks. This won't ever happen again. Honest governor, round and round we go. Olivia Utley, thank you very much for your expertise as ever. And moving on to today's other huge news, and the outgoing BBC boss Tim Davie praised staff this morning and said the corporation must stand up for our journalism, and also insisted that it will control its own narrative, which will not be just given by our enemies.
We will thrive. We will thrive. And this narrative will not just be
given by our enemies. It's our narrative. I do hear everyone when we have to be very clear and stand up for our journalism. We are a unique and precious organisation.
Well, this comes, of course, a day after the US President Donald Trump threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion over the editing of his speech in a Panorama documentary. Well, let's not now cross and speak with GBNews national reporter Will Godley, who joins us from a beleaguered broadcasting house. Will Godley, Tim Davie there, signing off in his resignation speech, fighting talk, the kind of talk Donald Trump might be proud of. We must fight for our journalism and not give in to our enemies. It seems well short of any form of apology.
Well, yeah, kind of echoing Donald Trump's rhetoric. Of course, even the same language that was used in the two snippets of Donald Trump's speech that was used in that Panorama documentary that has got the BBC into all of this trouble in the first place. Tim Davie telling staff behind me that they need to fight for their journalism, but this all started, of course, Tim Davie entering into the BBC Today, making his first public appearance since his shock resignation on Sunday. And, of course, you might have expected him to address the elephant in the room more head-on. And when he was talking to reporters earlier on today, I shouted a question out to him. Are you going to apologise to Donald Trump? Well, no answer from him then, and seemingly no apology yet. But he did hold this 40-minute call. We heard a little bit of that earlier on. This 40-minute call, a Q&A from Tim Davie answering some of the questions that BBC staffers might have, and it's been described by one person inside the building behind me as a total waste of time. Another person described it to me as simply not answering the pertinent questions, those being: are the BBC going to apologise to Donald Trump? Are they going to settle with Donald Trump? And is there systemic bias at the BBC? Well, none of those questions answered, but other questions were. Of course, this was a 40-minute call, and in those in that call, he was asked why he resigned. Tim Davie citing the relentlessness of the role of Director General, the upcoming charter renewal, and the pressure following criticism of this Panorama on Donald Trump. And he also seemingly praising the BBC journalists as well, saying he is fiercely proud of the BBC and that journalists there are doing a fantastic job. And as you say, Martin, issuing this rallying call for BBC journalists to fight for their journalism, but they will be having to do that without Tim Davie, of course, after he resigned on Sunday. The job of that fight and the person leading the charge will be whoever is the new Director General, and I'm told that there is large spread speculation in the building behind me about who that next Director General will be. One person told me they hope it's someone who is as much of a champion of the BBC as Tim Davie is. Of course, the big job that the next Director General will face will be navigating this charter renewal. Of course, the BBC's current charter ends at the end of 2027, in some 2 years' time, and these conversations about what their next charter will look like will be beginning to take place. And now with the government, and a large part of that is what their funding will look like. Of course, the BBC's current funding model is largely based on the licence fee. Will the government look to change that funding model, make it a different model, a Netflix-style model? Well, that is all questions that the next Director General will have to ask and try and navigate, of course, as they need to continue their funding for what is an organisation currently in crisis, Martin.
Well, Will Godley, an excellent summary, and sorry seems to be the hardest word, but 10 o'clock Friday night is the deadline that Donald Trump has set, and there's a billion reasons why the BBC should perhaps sharpen its quill and say sorry. Will Godley, thanks for joining us there from Broadcasting House. Well, meanwhile, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, has weighed in on the situation and said this: the resignation of Tim Davie and Deborah Turnus must be a chance for the BBC to turn a new leaf, rebuild trust and not give in to those like Nigel Farage who want to destroy it. We must stand up for a strong, independent BBC to stop Trump's America becoming Farage's Britain. Well, let's now speak with the Liberal Democrat MP for North Norfolk, Steph Ackroan. Steph, a pleasure to have your company. As ever, it's been way too long. Can I ask you, is your leader obsessed with Nigel Farage? What's this got to do with Nigel Farage? The BBC made an editorial blunder by their own admission. They made a huge error, and for that, they've incurred the wrath of Donald Trump. This isn't about Nigel Farage, it's about the BBC saying sorry.
Well, it's great to be back and lovely to see you as always. I don't think Ed's obsessed with Nigel Farage, but I think what we're seeing is a pile-on, and you've been in this game long enough to know that pile-ons happen for all sorts of different reasons. Every single person with an axe to grind about the BBC has got an opinion about it, and I'm worried about how they're using this to try and make the case to get rid of it. I think that's why Ed's right to call it out for what it is.
Do you think there's an argument now, as many people do, to put the BBC to the market, to defund it, to let people make the decision? Is it something that's worth paying for? We pay for everything we like now. We pay for Netflix, Apple TV, so on and so forth. I hasten to add that GB News is totally free. Is it time to put the BBC to the market?
Well, I don't want to shut down any conversation, because the reason I like coming on GB News is that we may or may not agree on different things, but we have to have the conversation. My personal view is this is not a good time to be calling for the BBC to be commercialised. I think we've got to remember that journalists are always going to have some sort of past experience that leans them into a particular way or another. We're never going to isolate that completely. But the BBC and the future of the BBC is not just about journalism, panorama or news. It's about Strictly and Traitors and sport and education. And those are the things that I think can only be delivered to the high standard they're delivered by most people's account already with a publicly funded BBC. I don't think that's been brought or should be brought into sharp focus in this particular conversation.
But, Steph, one of the particular focuses here is politics, is news, and how the BBC interprets it. Many people believe they have a political filter, they have a mindset, they're part of a cultural establishment and elite. And look, people always complain the BBC is biased, whichever part of the political spectrum they are from. A report out today, a YouGov poll, 31% believe it's biased in favour of the left, 19% believe it's biased in favour of the right. But, Steph, here's the key point. Only 19% of BBC viewers think the BBC has no bias at all. I put it to you, the BBC has measurably failed in its duty to be impartial and neutral.
Well, I would say that I'd prefer it if half the population thought they were biased in the left and the other half biased towards the right, because that would probably suggest they were getting it about right most of the time. And I would expect most people with any opinion at all to be challenging the BBC to better represent that opinion. In fact, we as Liberal Democrats have complained about the BBC's coverage of us in this Parliament, but we took that case to them, they listened, and that's part of our ongoing attempt to make sure that our voices are heard, particularly for the communities that we represent. So if there weren't any complaints, I'd say that's the real warning sign that they're not doing their job properly.
Right. OK, Steph Ackroan, thank you very, very much indeed. It's an absolute pleasure to have your company. It's been way too long. Please come on the show again soon. Thank you, Steph.
Surely will. Thanks.
Thank you. Cheers. Now, we've got live shots on your screens now of the US President Donald Trump. He's participating in a wreath-laying ceremony at the Arlington National Ceremony. Let's get those pictures on our screen now, if we could. Of course, Remembrance Day is a worldwide event, particularly felt heart-strong in America. Let's listen in to the last part. Listening in to the bugle. It doesn't matter wherever you go in the world, when you hear that bugle on a day like this, it remembers our bond of history, our band of brothers, our bond of blood. United States, United Kingdom, our troops, of course, allies. And it's just so moving to hear this today in Britain and in America. Wherever you are in the world, we must never forget the bonds of history. We must never forget those who fell. There is Donald Trump paying his respects at the Arlington National Cemetery. Okay, back to Britain now. And the Green Party Deputy Leader, Rachel Millward, well, she's come under fire after her council objected to housing asylum seekers in Crowborough. Well, the Deputy Leader of Wealdon District Council wrote to the Migration Minister, Mike Tapp, saying the authority lacked reassurance that both asylum seekers and local communities will be properly safeguarded. Well, critics are now arguing that the letter contradicts her party's traditionally warm and welcoming stance on asylum seekers. And I'm now joined by the Conservative MP for Weald of Kent, and that is Katie Lamb. Katie, welcome to the show. Isn't it funny how the Green Party of refugees welcome, except when it's on their own patch, their NIMBYs? No illegals in my backyard.
They think that we should welcome as many of these people as we possibly can, but they just want them to live. They just don't want them to live where they live, and it's very revealing that, you know, as soon as actually we're talking about in this case 600 asylum seekers housed very near where Rachel Millward lives and works and is a councillor, then, you know, suddenly this is a safety concern. So where do you think they should go then? If it's not at the end of her patch, if it's not on her turf, where should they be shoved? Into working class communities who have voted consistently against this for decades? Well, no, the people that we are talking about here, many of them will have come here illegally, and people who've come to this country illegally shouldn't be able to stay. The Green Party policy is that they should, and so, you know, logic dictates that if they're going to be here, then they are going to have to live somewhere. And exactly as you say, it's fascinating to see that the Greens would like them to be here, just not near them. I wonder, Katie Lamb, and I say this often, irrespective of party politics, perhaps we should go round and get people to write on a piece of paper that they are refugees welcome, politicians, journalists, whoever they may be, and say, OK, let's put them next to you. Let's have an HMO on your street. Let's have a hotel on your street. Maybe they would change their minds, toot sweet, just like this politician has from the Green Party. Well, we see this regularly. There was a Liberal Democrat member of Parliament, I believe, in Scotland recently, who has been vocal, and the party has been incredibly vocal about the need for more routes for refugees to bring more people to this country. And yet, when those people are going to be housed in his constituency, he's lodging concerns. He's saying that this is unsafe, it's unsustainable. That's right. I agree with that. But the only way that you can do anything about that is to manage who's coming into the country and to make it clear that if you come here illegally, you cannot stay. And that is the only way that we will ever get this crisis under control. Katie Lamb, can I quickly get your take on a story we're covering later on in the day? We've got an exclusive opinion poll coming out with our friends at JL Partners. 66% of Brits now support deporting all illegal immigrants. Is that something that you'd like to see happen? Well, our Conservative Party policy on this is really clear. If you come here illegally, then you will have to leave. We've said within a week. And I think that is fair. You know, the fundamental rules and laws of our country must be respected by everybody who comes here. And if you come here illegally, then even by the act of arriving, you've demonstrated that you don't respect those rules and laws. And that can't stand. OK, Katie Lamb, thank you for joining us. Fair to point out you had 14 years to do that and not many people were deported. But thanks for joining us, Katie Lamb. A pleasure to have your company. Now, in response to this story, a spokesperson for Wealdon District Council told GB News this. The Alliance for Wealdon takes seriously its commitment to community wellbeing, and that includes any asylum seekers staying in our area. It is clear that housing hundreds of men in an army camp on the edge of a small rural town is not the right thing to do. There are serious concerns for the safety of our community and the well-being of the asylum seekers, men fleeing trauma, war and persecution.
Well, coming up, locals in Epping were left gutted today after they lost a High Court bid to have asylum seekers kicked out of the Bell Hotel, and we'll be live there. And also next, an exclusive Jail Partners poll seen by GB News shows that the vast majority of Brits now back the mass deportation of illegal immigrants. It's another GB News exclusive. Don't go anywhere. That's next.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain was once the envy of the world. But look around. A nation that no longer knows what it is or where it's going. A country that's broken. How do we fix Britain? How do we bring it back? Friday night with Matt Goodwin at 8 p.m, only on GB News.
Decisions made in Washington aren't just shaping America, they're shaping Britain too. From migration to global security, from crime to health. Whatever happens in the White House today
will be felt in your town or city tomorrow.
That's why The Late Show is live from Washington, D.C.
Cutting through the politics to show you what it all means for Britain.
The Late Show live every night at midnight.
Only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Time is 4:26. You're with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, a new survey seen exclusively by GB News has revealed that 2/3 of the British public now support deporting all illegal immigrants. Well, according to a poll by JL Partners, as you can see on your screens, Brits are now more in favour of deporting illegal immigrants than even Americans in Trump's America. As in the US, only half of the people back the move. Well, I'm now joined by the co-founder of JL Partners, and that's James Johnson. James, welcome to the show, and thank you for giving this to us at GB News as an exclusive. Isn't it funny how just a couple of months ago even, the notion of mass deportations may have been a bit out there, a bit right-wing, and yet your poll shows it's now becoming a mainstream view.
Totally. Yeah, and that is my view on this. This is now this view of deportations of not just illegal migrants who have come very recently, not just illegal migrants who've committed crime in the UK, but all illegal migrants being deported is now the mainstream view in British politics. It is the view of Conservative voters. It is the view of Labour voters. It's even the view of Lib Dem voters. Out there, we now have a consensus really in Britain that if you're here illegally, you're breaking the law and you should go.
And James Johnson, that really is a breakthrough moment. And let's get that graphic back on the screen again. And it is incredible to point out, you're absolutely right, there is plurality in political parties and their voters. Look, the Liberal Democrats, 64% of Lib Dem voters, James Johnson, want to deport all illegal immigrants. Labour Party, 63%, even 42% of the Greens. And that's the biggest tranche of those who have an opinion. James Johnson, is this a wake-up call to our political class? Some of them who seem to think these kind of views, well, they're fascist.
Yeah, I mean, even Zach Polanski's Green Party has more people than not saying that they want all illegal migrants deported. Look, I think this is a common sense issue for Brits. I really think they look at it and they say, you know, people are here illegally, they shouldn't be in the country, therefore they should go. This isn't seen as a political issue. This isn't seen as good versus bad or right versus wrong or left versus right. It's just seen as common sense. And I think that's what's really fueling these numbers. The fascinating thing about this is that, as you said, Martin, in the introduction there, not only are Brits more supportive of deportations than Americans are, but Conservative and Reform voters are more supportive of it than Trump voters are in the US. And actually, when you look at the Labour voter, the average Labour voter is nearly as supportive as Trump voters are. So I would say it absolutely should be a wake-up call. And people on the left who are saying Labour's going too far on this issue, well, I think they're sorely mistaken. From Labour's point of view, they've got to go harder on this to meet their own voters, let alone voters they need to win over.
James Johnson, we there have a huge political quandary, because if Labour tack to the right on immigration, they may lose votes to Zach Polanski's rampant Green Party, and never the twain shall meet. It's an impossible tightrope. But James Johnson, another figure that really leapt out, when you add in criminality, so not just people who are here illegally in the first place, but if they commit crimes, the figures are even higher.
Yeah, when you do that, it goes up a huge amount. It goes right up to, hang on, I've got the figures for you here. It goes up to 81% support with only 8% opposed. And that's real support across all political parties. Look, I do think Labour have a political quandary. They're clearly getting pressure from the left, from the Greens, from the sort of Corbynistas, from the sort of Islamist vote out there in some of these inner city areas. But fundamentally, the vast majority of their voters, the vast majority of the British person that comes out and votes in these elections is of the view that deportations need to take place, especially for criminals, but actually across the board too. So for me, actually, politically, it is a no-brainer. I think on social media, you know, in the Westminster world, we can inflate the differences between voters on these things. Actually, this is a pretty simple one. If you're a political party in the UK right now, and you're looking to get more than 10 or 15% of voters on the left, then actually you should take this position.
Do you think, James Johnson, I mean, that makes common sense. It all adds up. But politics isn't driven by common sense. It's driven by ideology. It's driven by the need to be seen to be nice. Do you think there's any chance that the Liberal Democrats will listen to 2/3 of their own voters and suddenly channel their inner Farage?
No, I don't think they will. And look, there's an argument that they shouldn't, right? We get a lot of flack as pollsters for saying the British public, we get misinterpreted as saying the British public think this, therefore politicians should do this. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that there is eventually a gap that widens between political elites and the public. And on some issues, like capital punishment, for example, the public have backed capital punishment for a long time. Political parties haven't backed it. The public don't care. But on immigration, which is impacting individuals' lives day after day, week after week, in their communities, in their towns, at schools, hospitals, even their own jobs, this has become an issue where the public, where the politicians can't ignore the public. And I think that's the point where we've got to. There is a breaking point here in terms of the relationship between politicians and the public. So, yes, of course, ideology matters, and of course, leadership matters. And politicians should always put what they think is right first. But on this issue of immigration, if you don't deal with voters' concerns, eventually they will just look elsewhere, and they'll often go down a more extreme route than you'd like them to.
James Johnson, it's an excellent poll. It really cuts the nub of the matter, and thank you so much, my friend, for sharing it with us here at GB News exclusively. Superb. James Johnson from JL Partners. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Pleasure, mate. Now, lots more still to come between now and 5 p.m, including locals in Epping who were left gutted today after they lost a High Court bid to have asylum seekers kicked out of the notorious Bell Hotel. We'll be there and we'll be live speaking to Adam Brooks, great friend of the channel and a resident. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon to you. It's 32 minutes past 4. Our headlines. Asylum seekers can continue living at a hotel in Essex after the council lost a landmark legal battle to remove them. It was at the High Court. Epping Forest District Council were seeking to block migrants lodging at the Bell Hotel in Epping by arguing its owner had flouted planning rules. The Justice Secretary's confirmed that 3 mistakenly released prisoners remain at large. David Lammy told MPs none of the 3 are convicted sex offenders, but said a potential 4th release in error earlier this month is still being investigated, and that prisoner may still be on the run. A woman caught with £5 billion worth of stolen Bitcoin has been jailed for 11 years and 8 months for money laundering. Kian Zimin was caught when police kicked open the door of an Airbnb in a suburb of York in April last year. It is the country's biggest cryptocurrency seizure. Well, Donald Trump has threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion over the editing of his speech in a Panorama documentary. Earlier, the outgoing Director General, Tim Davie, told staff that they must protect their journalism. And the latest figures show unemployment has risen to 5% in the 3 months to September. That is the highest rate since 2021, and it's above the projected rate. Those are your headlines for the moment. I'll be back with a full bulletin at 5.
Tune into GB News Radio wherever you are, online, on DAB digital radio, on TuneIn, on Radio Player, and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News.
Hello again, very good afternoon to you. I'm here with your GB News weather update from the Met Office. More rain to come for many of us through the next couple of days, and it is staying exceptionally mild for most as well. Currently, we're trapped in a warm sector with a warm front pushing its way northwards across parts of Scotland and a cold front sweeping in from the west. Both these frontal systems, they're bringing a fair amount of rain as we go through the end of today and overnight into tomorrow, but a lot of it is clearing away towards the north and pushing further east. As a result, there will be some drier, clearer weather developing across southern parts of Scotland, northern parts of England and Wales, and also much of Northern Ireland. Where we get these clearer skies, the drier weather, it could turn a little fresh, a little chilly for some, but most places will stay pretty mild. Some places only dropping to around 12 or 13 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow then, it's a wet start across many parts of the south and the southeast. That front lingering here, rainfall totals building up across the southwest in particular, and some strong winds. Also a bit of a damp start across parts of Scotland and the far north of Northern Ireland, but actually in between those two zones of wet weather, well, there's a lot of dry weather to be had first thing, particularly across parts of northern England and the north of Wales. However, as we go through the day, those two wetter zones are going to sandwiched together. So the front in the south will be making its way northwards across the Midlands, North Wales and into northern England, and some of that rain in the far north will also push a little bit further southwards as well. So turning cloudier in places where it starts bright, and there'll be some rain arriving too. In the southeast, things could turn a bit brighter later on, and with that mild air still, we're looking at temperatures peaking around 16 Celsius. Later on tomorrow evening, we're going to see that rain across central parts continuing to edge a bit further northwards into the far north of England and southern Scotland later on. As we go through into Thursday, well, it looks a bit mixed. A bit of rain for some, but some dry weather too. Friday, however, cold air in the north and heavy rain in the south.
Thank you, Britain, for sharing over 5 million comments on your say. Because when you talk, we listen.
Good afternoon. This is the latest AI travel news from GBnews.com. The M8 westbound at Junction 19 Kingston Bridge is partially blocked due to a broken vehicle. The M62 eastbound between junctions 29 and 30 faces delays, clearing by 5:15. The M6 northbound in Walsall has a crash, resolving by 6. The A14 eastbound in Northamptonshire has a lane closed between junctions 10 and 11. The M25 clockwise in Surrey faces delays, clearing by 5:15. And on the trains, there is major disruption to both Gatwick Express and Great Northern services. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:37. You're with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, a council in Essex has lost its bid for a High Court injunction to block asylum seekers from being housed in the controversial Bell Hotel in Epping. Well, joining us now live from outside the Bell Hotel is the businessman and the activist and the great friend of the show, Adam Brooks. Adam, welcome to the show. Locals in the area no doubt gutted about this decision, once again leaving many people believe that perhaps the human rights of asylum seekers come before the human rights of local residents.
Yeah, look, Martin, it was expected, if we're honest. Most people didn't hold much hope. Look, it is us versus the establishment, and the establishment and this Labour, authoritarian Labour government have made it quite clear that migrants' rights trump the rights of local residents. We was hoping that simple planning law would suffice here, and obviously it hasn't. But let's just say that the local council were very slow off the mark in the early days. They've done so many things wrong. They did not back us with our protests either. The only reason this has got to the court and the local authority have pushed ahead with this is because we put feet on the ground. And locals are furious today, Martin, absolutely furious. The family of the young girl that was sexually assaulted are so upset, are so angry, and they are just... They just can't get their heads around how this government is going against us. As we know, we vote MPs in, we vote a government in, not just to represent us, but to keep us safe, Martin. And this government is doing neither things. They're actively putting our young girls and our women in danger by housing these undocumented, unvetted men. The authorities do not know one thing about the individuals in that hotel. And we have seen up and down the country rapes, sexual assaults, a murder, and various other crimes. I go on these paedophile sting sites almost daily, and some of the people are illegal immigrants that have been here just days. We have no way of knowing their background or their intentions, Martin, and this is only going to get worse. I think we're up to nearly 40,000 for the year under this Labour government. I thought they was going to smash the gangs. I thought they was going to detain and deport every illegal immigrant that come over. That's what Keir Starmer said just 3 months ago. They are liars, and they are putting the British public and our women and children in danger.
Adam Brooks, of course, I am duty-bound to say that, of course, not everybody who goes in these hotels is a sex offender or a potential sex offender or a criminal, but you're right to point out the fears of the community. And Adam Brooks, just to be absolutely clear to our viewers, there is a particular sensitivity around the Bell Hotel because of its proximity to a school.
Yes. Look, there are fields behind the hotel behind me. Just 300 metres across that field is St John's Secondary School. I have 2 nieces at that school. So you can understand why I'm so passionate about being here on the protests and pushing back. Now, these migrants hang about the high road. We have behaviour in the past of them being drunk on the benches, lewd behaviour towards schoolgirls. We've had flashing, we've had these migrants following women. We've had things thrown at local residents, defecating on the common just the other side of this road. This hotel has caused this community so much harm over the last 18 months. I cannot believe that those that we vote to represent us are going against us with this, and that the courts are not upholding. Look, if I built an extra extension on my home and I breached planning laws, it would be within weeks or months that I would have to knock that building down. This hotel is not a hotel anymore. It is actively against its planning restrictions and its licence. Why is this not being stopped? And that is happening up and down the country, Martin. We cannot get our heads around this. And look, there is going to be a protest within the next few hours here at the Bell Hotel. All I'm hearing, my phone is ringing off with people about what time to get here. We think it's 6 or 7 o'clock at the moment, but there is going to be a serious amount of anger and disappointment from locals here tonight.
Adam Brooks, could I get your opinion on a survey we have on the channel today while you're here? An exclusive poll from JL Partners has said that 66% of Brits now support deporting all illegal immigrants. And when that rises to illegal immigrants who've committed crimes, it's rising to 81%. Adam Brooks, the notion of deporting illegal immigrants isn't some far-right conspiracy theory. It's now a majority view held by those who vote for all political parties. Are our political class, Adam Brooks, completely and utterly out of touch with the public?
100%, Martin. There's a reason why GB News is doing so well in the ratings and is the #1 news channel in this country at the moment, because it speaks to normal people. It platforms people like me that speak to everyday Brits, you know, in my business and around town. The anger at this immigration and illegal immigration is off the charts, and I wouldn't be surprised if that poll is underplaying the feeling out there. Our political class keeps speaking to, you know, the old ladies in the coffee shop, or their constituents that are mostly Remainers, are away from this trouble. They do not see the trouble that illegal immigration is causing this country, and even legal migration. They are so far removed from everyday Brits, and that is why they are going to be destroyed at the next election, Martin, because they haven't listened. And that goes for the Conservatives as well. We've had years of them pretending to listen to us and then doing something completely different. At this, I cannot see anything but a reform whitewash at the next election, and that is because they're the only party that is listening to the majority.
OK, Adam Brooks, thank you for joining us there. An impassioned speech from the Bell Hotel. Just point out, you made a few allegations there, things that are going on in the area, which we can't validate. We're not there. But just to point out, yeah, that situation. Adam Brooks, thanks for joining us. And as that protest no doubt gathers steam later on, thanks for joining us, Adam Brooks, on the channel today. Well, a Home Office spokesperson has told GB News this: we are furious at the level of illegal migrants and asylum hotels in this country. And this government will close every asylum hotel. Work is well underway to move asylum seekers into more suitable accommodation, such as military bases, to ease pressure on communities across the country. And we are working to do so as swiftly as possible as part of an orderly, planned and sustained programme. And this judgment allows us to do that. Now, for surge some holiday sun this year, here is the forecast for some of the top European destinations.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
A lot of fine weather at the moment across the Med, but whilst it's warm in Spain, there is some wet and windy weather moving through Madeira, approaching the Channel Islands and also affecting Portugal. Later, that's going to push through parts of Spain, but ahead of it we've got a southerly airflow and above average temperatures, a lot of sunshine through Italy into Greece as well. Keen breeze here, 1 or 2 showers, and you can see that unsettled weather affecting Tenerife on Thursday.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Well, we say small flag. It was 30 feet across, 24 feet high. But, so I suppose it's relative. But it had a brand through the middle of it, or a campaign really, says flytheflag.uk.
Yeah.
Because if we just put up a Union flag, then people would just go, a Union flag. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to correct that. Everybody tries to pull you up, but it's not a Union Jack. Well, I've decided we all know it better as the Union Jack. No other country has got a Union Jack. They've got a flag of the country. So I'm no longer going to accept people trying to pull us up for that.
Yep.
But anyway, so we put it on there so that people would identify that we're trying to do something, not just another flag.
Yeah.
So the council didn't like that because they said it's not a flag, it's an advertisement. Well, I'm not too bothered. There was a bit of a mistake on the proofing as well, which is ironic because the company that manufactured it was actually based in is based in Clown in Chesterfield, UK printing company, and they made a mistake and I didn't really spot it because I was out of the country.
All right.
So that also caused a problem. But I thought, well, I'm not just going to take it down because of that. I own the building. Let's just see what happens. So I thought, no, I had a principle. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to leave it up and let's if you want to take us to court, if you want to waste taxpayers' money, I'll fight it out of principle.
So Chesterfield councillors, they clutched their pearls, but what's been the reaction in the community?
I would say 98, 99% positive. People going past, popping the router, thumbs up. Of the various different videos and images that have been up, we think we're nearly 3 million views, which is an estimate, but 99%, you're always going to get some dissenters. Some people want to call it racist, fascist. Just, I think it's just the easy tropes to chuck out there that they've chucked out so much that they've lost all their meaning, really.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:49. You're with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, a major review has found that the UK's counter-terror laws are failing to keep British people safe. Well, according to an independent commission, the law used to ban Palestine action and the government's Prevent scheme are creating utter confusion. Now, the report also warns that the majority of people referred to the Prevent scheme are dismissed, and that's because they show no clear ideology, despite some committing violent and very serious offences later on down the line. Well, let's now speak with the former Prevent practitioner, and that's Charlotte Littlewood. Charlotte, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure to have your company. We've had this conversation several times before. Prevent doesn't seem fit for purpose, and the latest flaw in its strategy, if you like, is they simply don't recognise people's ideological background, so they send them on the way, even when they have all the potential to become serious offenders.
There's absolutely a lot that needs to be fixed with Prevent, but I would be really careful with this report in question. I've had a good look at it today, and just to go through a few of the recommendations, it calls for ideology to be a much reduced focus of the Prevent agenda. And obviously we know that ideology is the core tenet of terrorism. It's violence for ideological reasons. It wants to stop referring to Islamism and Islamists entirely because it includes the word Islam. It wants to remove the duty to implement Prevent schemes, so the legal requirement for schools to actually engage with Prevent at all. What this is not a proposal for a new Prevent, but it is a watering down of our counterterrorism strategy entirely and a replacement of that with a general violence prevention scheme. So I'm very worried about this review. We still haven't implemented any of the Shawcross proposals. And actually what's interesting in this report is it calls out Shawcross pretty clearly and says that he had or his team had a right-wing bias and that they tried to dismiss right-wing extremism and say that there was not enough focus on Islamism. So I think you can see this really as an academic glossing of a political agenda to remove Prevent. And it's underpinned and has been advised on by groups that the government has no relationship with because they have links with extremism.
And yet, Charlotte, the fact remains that Axel Rudakabana was referred to Prevent 3 times before he went on to murder 3 beautiful young girls. An assessment of him found there was no apparent ideology. So it's fair to point out that Prevent is failing to locate. I agree with you about their obsession with the far right. I agree with you about the preposterousness of worrying about offending Muslims if they're Islamic terrorists. Who cares about offending people? It's their job to save lives. But Rudakabana walked away 3 times. Prevent's got huge, huge problems.
So this is where I would agree with this report, and it talks about using the prevent apparatus to actually catch things that are wider than the prevent remit itself. So prevent is really good at having first responders call in with a risk, and then that should be taken to a multi-agency panel, which is in place. But sometimes the first responders go, oh, that's not got a clear ideological underpinning, therefore we're not taking it to the multi-agency panel at all. So I would argue that it could be used if you had more people in the triage, if you had more manpower, it could be used to triage different risks like Alexa Rudukabana. And I think it could be effective at that. But what you must not do at the same time is reduce the counterterrorism aspect. So yes, increase the ability to deal with different cases, but still have that focus on ideology. Do not lose sight of understanding Islamism and Islamist extremism. And that's what the authors of this report want.
OK, lots of sensible recommendations there. Thank you very much for joining us, as ever. Pleasure to have your company, and that's the former Prevent practitioner Charlotte Littlewood. Thank you very much. Now, in response to this story, a Home Office spokesperson has told GB News this. Prevent continues to play a vital role in this by stopping people from becoming terrorists and has diverted close to 6,000 people away from violent ideologies. But we know there is further to go, which is why a number of recommendations from the Lessons for Prevent report have been immediately actioned, and its remit and effectiveness is consistently reviewed. Now, don't go anywhere, because in the next hour we'll bring you the Culture Secretary's statement on the resignations at the BBC, and I'll be joined by the Red Wall Rottweiler, Lee Anderson, as Reform UK sensationally walks away from taking part in a BBC documentary. Another exclusive here on GB News, and that's next.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello again, very good afternoon to you. I'm here with your GB News weather update from the Met Office. More rain to come for many of us through the next couple of days, and it is staying exceptionally mild for most as well. Currently, we're trapped in a warm sector with a warm front pushing its way northwards across parts of Scotland and a cold front sweeping in from the west. Both these frontal systems, they're bringing a fair amount of rain as we go through the end of today and overnight into tomorrow, but a lot of it is clearing away towards the north and pushing further east. As a result, there will be some drier, clearer weather developing across southern parts of Scotland, northern parts of England and Wales, and also much of Northern Ireland. Where we get these clearer skies, the drier weather, it could turn a little fresh, a little chilly for some, but most places will stay pretty mild. Some places only dropping to around 12 or 13 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow then, it's a wet start across many parts of the south and the southeast. That front lingering here, rainfall totals building up across the southwest in particular, and some strong winds. Also a bit of a damp start across parts of Scotland and the far north of Northern Ireland, but actually in between those two zones of wet weather, well, there's a lot of dry weather to be had first thing, particularly across parts of northern England and the north of Wales. However, as we go through the day, those two wetter zones are going to sandwich together. So the front in the south will be making its way northwards across the Midlands, North Wales and into northern England, and some of that rain in the far north will also push a little bit further southwards as well. So turning cloudier in places where it starts bright, and there'll be some rain arriving too. In the southeast, things could turn a bit brighter later on, and with that mild air still, we're looking at temperatures peaking around 16 Celsius. Later on tomorrow evening, we're going to see that rain across central parts continuing to edge a bit further northwards into the far north of England and southern Scotland later on. As we go through into Thursday, well, it looks a bit mixed. A bit of rain for some, but some dry weather too. Friday, however, cold air in the north and heavy rain in the south.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Thank you so much for helping us to reach 8 million followers and subscribers across our social media channels. That's 8 million fearless Brits standing up for what really matters.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. On the M8, disruptions westbound at junction 19 Kingston Bridge are causing delays due to a stranded vehicle. On the M25 in Surrey, clockwise traffic between junction 5 and junction 6 is experiencing hold-ups, with 2 lanes closed due to a broken down vehicle. Drivers should expect an hour delay. In Northamptonshire, on the A14 eastbound between Junction 10 Burton Latimer and Junction 11 Cranford, a broken down vehicle is causing disruption, with one lane closed. And on the trains, major disruptions affect Gatwick Express and Southern services. Plan accordingly if you are travelling by rail. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
You could win your entire Christmas on us this year, all magically delivered to you in time for the big day. There's cash, £30,000 in tax-free cash to make your new year go with a bang. There's also a further £10,000 to spend on all the gifts. We've also got Christmas lunch for you, with £1,000 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. And finally, a festive GB News goodie bag, so there's something for everyone under the tree. For another chance to win, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB17 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 28th of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, this is Jubes & Co with you.
Hello everyone, Patrick Christie is here. GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Access the stories that matter to you. Take the GB News family with you on any device. And as long as you have an internet connection, tune in to GB News anywhere on the planet or beyond. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word. Very, very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live across the UK, all the very latest news, debate and analysis all the way through until 6 p.m. And here's what's coming up on today's show.
We will thrive. We will thrive. And this narrative will not just be, given by our enemies.
In a barbed farewell speech earlier today, the outgoing BBC Director General Tim Davies slammed the BBC's enemies, imploring staff they need to fight for their journalism, but his words stopped well short of any form of an apology to Donald Trump. Trump, of course, is poised to slam the BBC with a $1 billion lawsuit at 10 o'clock on Friday night. And meanwhile, after the BBC versus Donald Trump scandal, the BBC has been dealt another huge blow. Today, GB News can exclusively reveal that Reform UK has sensationally pulled out of a planned BBC documentary called The Rise of Reform, and that was due to be screened in January. Find out exclusively why in around about 20 minutes' time, when I'll be joined in the studio by Lee Anderson. And locals in Epping were left gutted today after they lost the High Court bid to have asylum seekers kicked out of the Bell Hotel, as the Home Office once again put the well-being of asylum seekers before the well-being and safety of British citizens. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have your company. An astonishing poll we carried on GB News exclusively earlier on today. 66% of Brits now think deporting all illegal immigrants is a good idea, and that rockets to 81% when you add in the fact that they may have committed crimes on British soil. It's time for our parliamentarians out there to wake up. This isn't far right. This isn't fascism. This is now a mainstream accepted opinion by the British public. They're fed up. They want change. They want to be listened to. And I wonder if the ruling at Epping earlier on sent out a message that they're putting British people first or putting those of asylum seekers first. And don't go anywhere. Lee Anderson will be rocking into the studio. The red wool Rottweiler, always about as subtle as a brick to the head. He'll join me next, as well as somebody who was sacked, cancelled by the BBC for speaking out about immigration. An action-packed hour. Don't go anywhere. Get in touch. GBNews.com/you'll say is the way to do so. But now it's time for your headlines. And here's Aaron Armstrong.
Thanks, Martin. Good evening to you. 2 minutes past 5 here in the GB newsroom. The High Court has rejected an attempt to prevent asylum seekers being housed at a hotel in Essex. Epping Forest District Council had claimed the owners of the Bell Hotel were in breach of planning rules, but Mr Justice Mole dismissed the claim, ruling an injunction was not an appropriate means of enforcing planning control. The hotel became the scene of protests earlier this year when a migrant living there was convicted of sexually assaulting a woman and a teenage girl. The Conservative Party says the court has given a slap in the face to the people of Epping. The Home Office, though, insists the government will close all asylum hotels and say they're working to find alternative accommodation. The Justice Secretary's confirmed 3 mistakenly released prisoners remain at large. David Lammy told MPs none of the 3 are convicted sex offenders, but said a potential 4th release in error earlier this month is being investigated. The Justice Secretary's been facing questions in the Commons after his department confirmed earlier that 91 prisoners have been freed by mistake since April this year. Last week it had emerged 2 inmates were freed in error following the high-profile wrongful release of Hadush Kabatu, the now deported migrant at the heart of those protests in Epping. Outgoing BBC Director General Tim Davies told staff the corporation must stand up for its journalism. He was speaking 2 days after resigning over controversy about the way a speech by Donald Trump was edited in a Panorama documentary. Mr Davey insists the BBC will bounce back.
We will thrive. We will thrive. And this narrative will not just be, given by our enemies. It's our narrative. I do hear everyone when we have to be very clear and stand up for our journalism. We are a unique and precious organisation.
Well, President Trump's given the BBC until Friday to publish a full retraction of the Panorama programme or face a $1 billion legal action. Shadow Culture and Media Secretary Nigel Huddleston says the corporation owes him an apology.
We were wrong, and Donald Trump has a perfectly legitimate concern here. It could be perceived to be misleading. It transparently was. I mean, doctoring the video, but also the whole programme, there was issues. If you look at the number of people who were interviewed, it was 10 to 1, the people who opposed Donald Trump to those who supported him. And there wasn't a compensatory programme for Kamala Harris. So I think the president has some legitimate concerns. When they make an error, and when they have an error of judgment, which, by the way, the BBC chair has now admitted, they need to admit that they got it seriously wrong. What they did was mislead the public and give the impression that Donald Trump said something that he transparently did not.
A woman caught with £5 billion worth of bitcoins being jailed for 11 years and 8 months for money laundering. Kian Zimin was caught when police kicked open the door of her Airbnb in April last year in a suburb of York. She vanished and went on the run after officers seized more than 61,000 bitcoin in a raid of her rented home next to Hampstead Heath in North London, worth £5 million. Police say she fled China in 2017, arrived in the UK on a false passport and used funds stolen from thousands of Chinese pensioners. It is the country's biggest cryptocurrency seizure. The Work and Pensions Secretary, Pat McFadden, has accepted there are big challenges in the UK's labour market. The latest figures show unemployment has risen to 5% in the 3 months to September. It's the highest rate since early 2021. Average wage growth was down 0.1% to its lowest level since April 2022. And Mr McFadden says he's particularly concerned about young people not in work, training or education. Finally, the Queen and the Princess of Wales have attended services to mark Armistice Day as events have taken place across the country and indeed the world. Kate was at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire as the end of World War I was commemorated with a 2-minute silence. Queen Camilla attended a wreath-laying ceremony at Paddington Station in London. And the Prince of Wales has been explaining the significance of wearing a poppy in a video message aimed at young people.
When we remember, We connect with service in a personal way. And when we wear red poppy or take a moment of silence, we are saying thank you. We have not forgotten, and we will not forget.
And that's it for the moment. I'll have more for you at 5:30.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
But I do still have time to bring you up to date with the markets. So let's quickly run through it. The pound buys you $1.31 and what, €1.13. Gold costs £3,124.20 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 stopped trading a short time ago at 9,884 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Aaron. Now, the outgoing BBC boss, Tim Davie, praised staff earlier this morning and said the corporation must, quote, stand up for our journalism, and insisted that it will control its own narrative, which will not just be given by our enemies.
We will thrive. We will thrive. And this narrative will not just be, given by our enemies. It's our narrative. I do hear everyone when we have to be very clear and stand up for our journalism. We are a unique and precious organisation.
Enemies we must fight. Sounds a bit like Donald Trump. And, of course, this comes a day after the US President Donald Trump threatened to sue the corporation for over $1 billion over the editing of his speech in a Panorama documentary. Let's now speak with the journalist Harriet Sargent. Harriet, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. You wrote a very, very moving article in The Telegraph today. You worked for the BBC. You were making a documentary for BBC Radio 4, and you happened upon something which the BBC found uncomfortable to admit. Tell us more about it.
Well, so we were interviewing people like Andy Burnham in Manchester, and they were all giving us this story. This was 2016. Homelessness was rising, and the reason for this was austerity and the nasty Tories. And while we were walking around, I spotted this teenage couple begging on the streets. And I'd done a whole report on care, children in care, so I kind of recognized them as children in care. So I took them off for a hot chocolate and some donuts, and they told me that they were homeless. I said, well, why don't you go? I've been told about this homeless hostel. Why aren't you going there? And they said, well, every time we get there, the migrants have got there first, and there's no room for us. Well, I thought that was quite an important story. And when I looked into it, what they said was right. 1 in 3 homeless people outside the UK at that time were migrant. And in London, it was half. So I said, well, we must put this in because this explains why there are so many more homeless. It's because there's so many more migrants. And the BBC were horrified. And the editor who looked at what I was doing said, you cannot do that. You cannot say anything critical of immigration. And I said, well, these are young people. They've gone through a terrible time and we must talk about it. But I was told, no, if you mention it, you will never appear. You'll never be used by the BBC again. Which is what happened. I never was used by the BBC again.
So just to be abundantly clear, you're a journalist making a documentary about homelessness. You encounter a factual reality, and that is frontline services are greatly impeached upon by a new phenomenon. The phenomenon being immigration, homelessness. And when British nationals were trying to get into a hostel, they couldn't. Or it was harder because of foreign nationals, which is just a fact. And when you mention that to the BBC, they said, no, you can't say that because it might be what? Racist. And for that, you weren't hired again. That's ridiculous. That's editorial control.
Well, I was quite upset about it because I really enjoyed doing the documentary and I'd hoped to do some more. But I said no because I was told because you insisted, the BBC will never use you again. And they never did.
I find that just incredible that you can't even mention reality because it doesn't fit the script. Harriet Sargent, when you saw what's unravelled and happened with the Panorama, the October films, the Trump documentary, the accusations that come out of the Telegraph about editorial control and about internal bias, did any of this, with your experience in mind, take you remotely by surprise?
No, not at all. I mean, I'd gone through it. I'd been cancelled myself by the BBC, so I wasn't surprised at all. I was just very, very sad because I used to be a great fan of the BBC. And I mean, we've had Ed Davey talking about enemies. In fact, the biggest enemy of the BBC is the BBC itself.
And why do you say that? Because they are narrowly going down this, trammelling down this route of establishment politics, which alienates the mass of the viewership?
Yes, I mean, I've never had, I did one tweet, I've done the article, I've had an enormous amount of reaction. There are clearly a lot of people out there who are very upset with the BBC.
Harriet Sargent, it's so sad that just simply speaking the truth, you were cancelled by the BBC. But I think your story needs to be told. And I think more and more of your types of stories are going to come out. Simply honest journalists who just don't fit the script are finding their livelihoods imperished. Thank you very much for joining us, Harriet Sargent. It was a wonderful article. And thanks for having the bravery to speak out. You know, when you speak to people like Harriet, who by the way, is a wonderful person, a really caring person, simply speaking the truth, losing their jobs, I wonder if it's backing up this fact now the BBC seems to be completely and utterly out of touch. And there's a BBC bias survey out today by YouGov. 31% of the electorate thinking that the BBC is biased in favour of a left-wing political viewpoint. 19% on the other side think it's biased in favour of right-wing views. Quite how they come to that, I do not know. But look, it's their opinion. But here's the key point. Only 19% of all BBC viewers think the BBC has no bias at all. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have the vast majority of licence fee payers feel that the BBC has political bias. They feel it has bias, particularly in its news output. You can't go anywhere on the BBC now without hearing bias. You can't watch Country File without having racism or climate change or slavery rammed down your throat. You can't watch Doctor Who, Doctor Woke, without having pronouns and racism and feminism and slavery and the empire shoved down your throat. You can't watch hardly any of its output without having identity politics rammed down your throat. Just seen home interview outside. Our next guest, Lee Anderson, will be joining us shortly. Lee Anderson has got a sensational exclusive to share with us exclusively here on GB News. Reform UK have today pulled out of participating in the BBC documentary with the same filmmakers, October Films, who made that Panorama Trump special that's caused so much consternation. The full story of why that happened is coming next. But let's get to my next guest now. I'm joined by the political consultant, Stuart Thompson. Stuart, thank you for joining us on the show. It's heartbreaking in a sense. I don't know if you heard our last guest there, Harriet Sargent, a documentary maker for the BBC. She's no fascist. You know, I beg your pardon, we all now go to House of Commons where the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, is addressing MPs. I beg your pardon.
Has a responsibility to uphold the highest standards. I agree. Over the past week, I've been in regular contact with him and his team to ensure that where these standards have not been met, firm, swift and transparent action follows. I welcome the steps that have already been set out, and I will keep the House updated as the BBC leadership grips these issues. The concerns that have been raised are serious in and of themselves, but some in this House have gone even further, suggesting that the BBC is institutionally biased. It should not be lost on us that the BBC has faced criticism from all sides for its coverage of highly contentious and contested issues, and accused of giving too much airtime to particular parties and for giving them too little. Those in this House attacking the BBC from left and right for not expressing views they agree with should consider just what is at stake. There is a fundamental difference between raising serious concerns over editorial failings and members of this House launching a sustained attack on the institution itself. Because the BBC is not just a broadcaster, it is a national institution that belongs to us all. Every day it tells the story of who we are, the people, places and communities that make up life across the UK. It projects British values, creativity and integrity to the world. It underpins our creative industries, has a footprint in our nations and regions that is unmatched by any other. And it is by far the most widely used and trusted source of news in the United Kingdom. At a time when the lines are being dangerously blurred between fact and opinion, news and polemic, the BBC stands apart. It is a light on the hill for people here and across the world. Trusted news and high-quality programming is essential to our democratic and cultural life. All of us in this House should value it, uphold it and fiercely defend it. The BBC is facing challenges, some of its own making, but it is doing so in the context of a revolution in the media landscape that has challenged all broadcasters and polarised and fragmented our national debate. It is time to grip this with a clarity of vision and purpose that secures the BBC's future. Throughout its history, Madam Deputy Speaker, the BBC has always adapted and evolved. This is an institution that began in the era of radio, when it was deemed an existential threat to the newspaper industry. It evolved into the age of mass audiences, ushered in by the invention of television, and it navigated the complexities of reporting during the Second World War. We will imminently begin the Charter Review, which will set the terms of the BBC for the next decade, and through it we will collectively write the next chapter of the BBC's story. Together we will ensure the BBC is sustainably funded, commands the public's trust and continues to drive growth, good jobs, skills and creativity across every region and nation of the UK. In an era in which trust is fraying and truth is contested across our nation, it will ensure the BBC remains fiercely independent and is genuinely accountable to the public it serves. We will publish a Green Paper and launch a public consultation shortly, and I will set out more detail to the House in the coming weeks. I would like to thank the outgoing Director General for his service and his commitment to public service broadcasting over many years. And I'd like to thank the CEO of News for leading the BBC's news operation through stormy times. I do not underestimate the challenge of taking on these roles and the personal toll that they can take on the individuals who hold them. As we write the next chapter of an institution that has stood at the centre of British public life for a century, our overarching goal is simple: to ensure the BBC can renew its mission for the modern age and continue to inform, educate and entertain, not just for the coming decade, but well into the next century. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance notice of her statement. The BBC is in a sorry mess, and sadly one of its own making, that has resulted in the resignations of the Director General and the CEO of News. These recent leadership changes are a response to the growing number of examples of bias in the BBC, one of which has resulted in a potential $1 billion lawsuit. This is why the Leader of the Opposition has said the BBC needs to change and needs saving from itself. Otherwise, we may all pay the price in reputational damage and in our pockets as licence fee payers. We all want the BBC to succeed, to be the best possible version of itself, but that requires institutional change and far more than a few moves at the top. But let me first acknowledge, Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the many good things that the BBC does well in delivering on its principles to inform, educate and entertain, from Strictly and Traitors to world-class natural history programming, sport and local radio, and coverage of major national events, including, of course, the recent Remembrance services and events.
These are things we can all be proud of, that contribute positively to the BBC's brand and reputation at home and abroad. But the BBC also has a charter obligation for impartiality, and too many examples have come to light exposing bias at the BBC, particularly as it relates to the news and current affairs output. Examples that have often strayed far away from the BBC's own editorial guidelines. The coverage of trans rights, selective push notifications of news, the Gaza documentary, the output of the Arabic news service, reliance on stats provided by Hamas, all speak to bias at the BBC. And at a time when anti-Semitism is rising around the world, the BBC should surely think twice about distributing questionable data from a terrorist organisation bent on the destruction of Israel. We expect better from our national broadcaster. And I'm glad that the BBC chair has admitted an error of judgment relating to the Panorama programme on Donald Trump, which involved editing of his speech to give the impression that he said something that he did not say. The BBC now faces a hefty lawsuit, and we do not want to see the taxpayer, the licence fee payer, or the rest of the BBC suffer because of the poor judgment of Panorama programme makers who seem unable to distinguish opinion from impartial journalism, who clearly all thought the same. And that's precisely the problem. It's remarkable that in every area of their operations, the BBC seeks inclusivity and diversity other than in thought, other than in political thinking. Does the Minister agree that that must change, that the BBC's culture needs to change? And does the Minister agree that the BBC must provide a fulsome apology to the US President and hopefully avoid legal action? And does she agree that the BBC would do well to apologise to the British public too? Does she also agree we need a root and branch review of the BBC's adherence to impartiality, particularly as it relates to news and current affairs, and that we need more than apologies and resignations at the top, but clear actions on complaints processing, on governance, on oversight and on compliance to ensure that the BBC sticks to its charter obligations on impartiality and that it rigidly and consistently abides by its own editorial guidelines. The Minister did mention the next steps in the BBC Charter review, but we would appreciate more details on timelines as soon as possible. And could she confirm, though, what discussions she's currently having with the BBC leadership about the search for the new Director General? And given that the BBC Arabic service is funded in part by the British taxpayer through FCDO grants, can she confirm what discussions she is having with her FCDO colleagues about its future funding and governance arrangements, and about the impact the BBC's editorial failings have had with Israel and our partners in the Middle East? Action must be taken, and the serious issues discussed today must be addressed, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the BBC must become, once again, an institution that all of us, not just some of us, can be proud of.
Secretary of State. Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman? I know this has been an issue that has been of serious concern to him as it's unfolded over the past week. And can I say to him from the outset that I do strongly agree with him that 2 resignations are not the answer to the challenges that the BBC has faced, not just over the last week, but in recent months. I've come to this House too many times to share with the House progress updates on editorial failings. He mentioned some in relation to Gaza and to Glastonbury, but there have been others as well. I'm pleased that the chairman of the BBC, Dr. Samir Shah, has accepted where the institution has made mistakes. I'm pleased that he's been open with the chair of the Select Committee about that, and I'm pleased that he is setting out concrete actions that follow. I agree very much with the honourable gentleman that clear actions are important. They must be swift and they must be robust and they must be transparent. I also strongly agree with him that there is a problem of consistency in the way that those standards are consistently applied, which leaves individual journalists and individual presenters in a very difficult position. And that is a point that I've made to the chairman and previously to the Director General. In terms of the search for the Director General, I have had discussions with the chairman of the board about about that. The House should be aware that the government does not appoint the Director General as set out in the Charter. That is solely a matter for the board, but we stand ready to provide support where it's requested and necessary in order to make sure that we get the highest calibre individual. I understand from the board that there is a desire to move quickly on that, but that the existing Director General will remain in place to ensure a smooth transition, and I will update the House as I receive further information. He also asked particularly about the BBC Arabic service and funding for the World Service. I think it's important to recognise that there have been serious concerns and failings on the part of the BBC Arabic service. In response to that, in his letter to the chair of the Select Committee, Dr. Shah set out a number of steps that are being taken. I understand these include structural changes as well as individual staff changes. But I would gently push back against the assertion that this should affect our support for the World Service. The World Service is a light on the hill for people in places of darkness, and there are many in the world at the moment, and this government strongly supports the World Service and will continue to do so.
Sarah Owen.
OK, that was Lisa Nandy, the Coach Secretary. In many senses, I felt she was making a pitch to be the next Director General of the BBC. She started off with a single sentence saying the concerns raised about the BBC are serious, and then went into an effusive effigy of the BBC. Some have gone further and saying that the BBC is institutionally biased. Well, we should consider what is at stake. The BBC is not a broadcaster. We should cherish it. Lisa Nandy went on to say, it's by far the most trusted news source, is it? At a time when lines are blurred between fact and polemic, we need the BBC. It's time to secure the BBC's future. Lisa Nandy continued, it will ensure the BBC remains fiercely independent, and we will ensure its funding is sustainable. Hardly a mention of the scandal embracing the BBC at present. It's like a parallel universe. Well, let's now speak with the political consultant, Stuart Thompson. Stuart, I don't know if you listened into the Culture Secretary there, but she sounded like she's fully paid up member of the BBC board.
No, I don't agree with that at all, Mike. I mean, I think she did a very good statement summarising the challenges that the BBC absolutely has to overcome, and that was on both sides of the House there as well. I think there was violent agreement that, frankly, things do need to change, and the BBC needs to sort of up its game. But at the same time, those that believe that the BBC continues to do a good job despite the obvious huge errors that it has made in recent times. I'm not downgrading those in any way, shape or form, but the BBC still has a valuable role to play in this country and abroad as well.
Well, let's put it to the market. Let's let people decide. If it's worth anything, it's worth paying for. Let the public decide, defund it. If people want to buy it, let them do it. But why should anybody else have to pay for what they believe is propaganda they don't want?
No, well, then you're throwing away a century or more of the history and great programming, and it's not just the documentaries or anything along those sort of lines. It's the news output, the radio output. So actually, it delivers very good value for money. Now, whether you want to move to a subscription-based services, okay, then look at what Netflix, look at what Sky, Max, others look at what. But they don't provide all those other services. The market does not provide the full range of services that the BBC does.
But not everybody wants the full range. For example, if somebody wants to watch Strictly or Traitors, great, but why should they pay for the news output? That's the point. It's like, why should people have to pay for everything, even when a vast majority... There's an opinion poll out today, Stuart Thompson. Only 19% of the British public believe that BBC's news output isn't biased. So 81% think it's biased. Why should they pay for that?
You will find polls that vary over time. And look, I'm old enough to remember the 1980s, and it was violently right wing at that point. If you listen to the left, equally now it's violently left wing if you're from the right.
But it's never doctored documentaries and been caught with its pants down, and it's never faced $1 billion lawsuit from a president with a big checkbook that is not afraid to use. The BBC's reputation is in the gutter over Gaza, over trans issues, over cancelling reporters who dare to speak out about immigration. Times have changed, Stuart, and they've changed for the worse.
Well, they are challenges, absolute challenges that the BBC has to face, and the government and the opposition as well have to help them deal with those challenges. Now, the challenge from a president across the other side of the ocean is completely different. He does use legal remedies, as he would see them, to try and force his way on his own domestic broadcasters as well.
So if you know that, and if I know that, why do the Panorama programme not understand? We've got a litigious president who does multi-billion-dollar lawsuits against CBS, against the New York Times, time and time again. Why do the BBC think they're above the law? They're not.
They don't. And also, you're then sort of pushing together some producers or journalists on one particular programming and then equating that to the whole of the BBC. That is not fair on all the other brilliant journalists, documentary makers, camera people, sound engineers, the whole, the way that the cultural part of our economy vastly relies on the BBC as well should not be underestimated. And actually, one of the challenges facing those that support the BBC and its output is that now they have to stand up. They have to stand up during the Green Paper and make their voices known through that consultation period, which Lisa and Andy just set out. There's a big onus on supporters as well as opponents to get involved in the debate. Now, it may be...
Stop telling lies. Stop doctoring documentaries. Stop paying terrorists. Stop suppressing any form of debate that you disagree with around trans issues, around climate change. That's the point. There's an establishment ethos that imperviates all of the output. A lot of people are sick to the back teeth of it, and they're asking themselves, why should I be paying for it? Stuart Thompson, I've been told we have to move on. But thanks for joining us today on the show. It's a pleasure to have your company. Loads more still to come between now and 6 p.m, including just after the BBC versus Donald Trump scandal. The BBC has been dealt another huge blow today as Reform UK pull out of a planned BBC documentary. Lee Anderson, he's right next to me in the studio. That's next. But now, if you're travelling home from work or from school, here's your traffic and your travel update. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. The M74 is closed southbound between junctions 15 and 16, with vehicles diverted at junction 15. Expect 30-minute delays on the M6 northbound between junctions 9 and 10 due to a collision. The M1 near Luton is partially closed, with one lane shut between junctions 10 and 11. There's congestion on the M4 westbound from junction 40 Taibach to junction 46 Langifalach. In Surrey, a broken-down vehicle causes an hour's delay on the M25 clockwise between junctions 5 and 6. And on the trains, Gatwick Express and Southern services face major disruptions. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Hello again, very good afternoon to you. I'm here with your GB News weather update from the Met Office. More rain to come for many of us through the next couple of days, and it is staying exceptionally mild for most as well. Currently, we're trapped in a warm sector with a warm front pushing its way northwards across parts of Scotland and a cold front sweeping in from the west. Both these frontal systems, they're bringing a fair amount of rain as we go through the end of today and overnight into tomorrow, but a lot of it is clearing away towards the north and pushing further east. As a result, there will be some drier, clearer weather developing across southern parts of Scotland, northern parts of England and Wales, and also much of Northern Ireland. Where we get these clearer skies, the drier weather, it could turn a little fresh, a little chilly for some, but most places will stay pretty mild. Some places only dropping to around 12 or 13 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow then, it's a wet start across many parts of the south and the southeast. That front lingering here, rainfall totals building up across the southwest in particular, and some strong winds. Also a bit of a damp start across parts of Scotland and the far north of Northern Ireland, but actually in between those two zones of wet weather, well, there's a lot of dry weather to be had first thing, particularly across parts of northern England and the north of Wales. However, as we go through the day, those two wetter zones are going to sandwich together. So the front in the south will be making its way northwards across the Midlands, North Wales and into northern England, and some of that rain in the far north will also push a little bit further southwards as well. So turning cloudier in places where it starts bright, and there'll be some rain arriving too. In the southeast, things could turn a bit brighter later on, and with that mild air still, we're looking at temperatures peaking around 16 Celsius. Later on tomorrow evening, we're going to see that rain across central parts continuing to edge a bit further northwards into the far north of England and southern Scotland later on. As we go through into Thursday, well, it looks a bit mixed. A bit of rain for some, but some dry weather too. Friday, however, cold air in the north and heavy rain in the south.
Westminster, the ultimate clique.
And you're fighting like rats in a sack.
But here on the Camilla Tominey Show, we ask the questions the establishment media is too scared to ask.
OK, let me ask you a straight question, because I know you're a straight-talking politician.
Whether it's net zero, illegal immigration or law and order, nothing is off limits.
You had the power then.
Yeah, as I
and
say,
now you've lost it.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show that's fearless.
But no, let me finish my question if you don't mind, because it is my show.
Sundays at 9:30, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There, you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Time is 5:38 with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, after the BBC versus Donald Trump scandal, the BBC has been dealt another huge blow today. GB News can exclusively reveal that Reform UK has sensationally pulled out of a planned BBC documentary called The Rise of Reform that's due to be screened in January. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Reform UK MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson. Lee, before we get to that documentary revelation, you sat in with me and listened to Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary. I believe she made an impassioned defence of the BBC. What was your take?
It's astonishing, really, Martin. I thought she was talking about something completely different. It's like she'd been put out there as an employee of the BBC to defend the BBC, when, quite frankly, she should be calling for heads to roll. I mean, the barefaced cheek of it. Everybody, most people, according to poll, you've just spoke about earlier to your last guest, I think there's about 80% of this country actually do not trust the BBC anymore. So for the Culture Secretary to come out there in the comments and spout that nonsense, it's beyond words to me. It's beyond belief.
The Royal Charter is up for review in 2027, and if we listen to the mood music there of Lisa Nandy, it sounds like, well, her words were, together we will ensure its funding is sustainable. That, to me, sounds like BBC continuity. It
sounds, Martin, like a done deal to me. I think it's the only product in this country, or only service, should I say, where you are forced to pay for it, whether you use it or not, really. It should be a choice thing. We live in an age now where we've got probably 200 or 300 channels on our TV. People like to have that choice. They can go online and watch this stuff. So why should the BBC be any different? And I noticed the last guest you had on, he spoke about the history and culture of the BBC. Well, let's go back in history, shall we? There's been some really dark times through the 70s, 80s and 90s. We've seen some of them, come into surface over the past few months. We've got scandal after scandal with the BBC. It's trying to knock it down and build it again.
That brings us neatly onto the next revelation. The Reform UK parliamentarians have pulled out of a planned documentary with the BBC. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, well, we've been filming with a production company. Can I name the production company?
No, but you've gone.
OK, I won't name them. Well, we've been filming with a production company who have been making a documentary for the BBC, which I believe was due to be aired in January. And it was called The Rise of Reform. They filmed me over 2 or 3 days. I think they've done the same with Richard and Sarah and David Bull. And to be fair to the production company, very good, very professional, very good at what they do. And we thought it might be a decent documentary. Then obviously the news broke last week over this splice edit of the Trump speech on Capitol Hill, which went out, I believe, on Panorama. We've also been told it was the same production company that made that documentary. Now, I'm not saying that this production company are at fault here. We need to get to the bottom of that. But when you have a situation, Martin, where supposedly a bastion of truth, the BBC, has already done that to Donald Trump, our closest ally, our friend, our best mate, our mucker, they've done that to him, what are they going to do to us?
And so your position was, having taken part in the filming, that was already in the can, as it were. You decided to withdraw your permission to use that.
Yes.
Why?
Well, like I say, we've seen what they've done to Donald Trump in the speech. I keep watching it over and over again, and I cannot actually believe what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, how the BBC, which is the voice of our great nation, really, across the world, could do such a sneaky, underhand thing like that to our best friend in the world. But whether you love him or loathe him, he's our best friend, our best ally, and he's our protector.
So, to be clear, you felt, upon looking at what's happened before, on the balance of probability, yourself, Reform UK, took the position it was too big a risk to take.
It's a trust issue.
Potentially to do a splice edit on you, which could damage the party.
It's a trust issue, Martin. You know, I believe, and most people out there watching GB News will probably agree with us, that some of the mainstream media are not our best fans and would like to see the end of us. So when they've got, you know, hours, probably 40, 50, maybe 100 hours of footage there of me, Richard, Sarah and David, then there's a lot to play with there, and they can be very mischievous if they want to be, and they've proven already with the Donald Trump splice edit that they cannot be trusted.
We've heard about electoral interference. Certainly that features in the legal letter that Donald Trump's team have sent to the BBC. You've got until 10 p.m. on Friday evening to respond to that. Could be $1 billion mistake. Are you saying on GB News today that one of your fears could be that the presentation of BBC footage, potentially, of Reform UK could be used in an injurious way to damage the party's chances in future elections?
Well, they've done it with Donald Trump. Well, they tried to do it with Donald Trump. Whether it worked or not, that's up for debate. But, yeah, why not? I mean, then, like I say, Martin, they are not our biggest fans. You've seen some of the biased reporting, biased news reading on the BBC. You've seen people like Lineker on there spouting his nonsense over the years. They're not our best friends, so... You know, I'm not saying they would do it, but there's, you know, the trust has gone, Martin, I think, a little bit. And I think they've got to do a lot of hard work to regain our trust.
Can I ask you about that bias survey today? 31% of those who responded think the BBC is biased in favour of left-wing, 19% it leans towards the right. But here's the key point, 19% believe that the BBC isn't biased at all. And when a previous guest there spoke about the so-called golden age of BBC, when it didn't have a political bias, those days, we have to admit, surely this poll does, those days have gone.
I don't think there ever was a golden age for the BBC. It's been one scandal after another over decades and decades, Martin. But you're quite right. There was a point in history where you would struggle to guess which way a particular newsreader or presenter swayed politically. They always kept that close to their chest, but now it's quite clearly out in the open.
OK, Reform UK MP and Chief Whip Lee Anderson, thanks very much for joining us today in the studio on GB News, giving us that exclusive. Reform UK pulling out of that BBC documentary, The Rise of Reform, due to be screened in January. Now, coming up next, we'll cross live to Washington to hear from the beautiful Bev Turner for her take on the Culture Secretary defending the BBC. But before that, we're going to search some holiday sun. And here is the forecast for some of the top European destinations.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
A lot of fine weather at the moment across the Med, but whilst it's warm in Spain, there is some wet and windy weather moving through Madeira, approaching the Channel Islands and also affecting Portugal. Later, that's going to push through parts of Spain, but ahead of it we've got a southerly airflow and above average temperatures, a lot of sunshine through Italy into Greece as well. Keen breeze here, 1 or 2 showers, and you can see that unsettled weather affecting Tenerife on Thursday.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Britain was once the envy of the world, but look around. A nation that no longer knows what it is or where it's going. A country that's broken. How do we fix Britain? How do we bring it back? Friday night with Matt Goodwin at 8 p.m, only on GB News.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
We do have problems in the UK at the moment, but I will say I don't think it's all doom and gloom. We have great safety nets here, strict protections to protect and help children. We have free education ranking 4th in the world for universities as well. Free NHS, dodgy as it may be sometimes. And we also have a lot of culture, history and green spaces, which I think is really important. 74% of children said that they can walk to a park or green space near them. So I don't think it's all that bad, but I do think we have lost our sense of community, and that's something that we need to work on.
Why do you think it is that so many fewer people are having children now? I mean, the birthing, the sort of fertility crisis that this country has entered into, to be fair, matching basically all of the developed world, fewer and fewer people are having children.
I don't think it's just about the money. I think there's actually a huge social media rise of child-free influencers. I don't know if you've seen any of these, but they're just very anti-children.
They call them dinks. Have you heard of dinks? Double income, no kids.
Oh, yeah. It's very interesting. And I think it's, you know, we look at somewhere like Somalia, where they have around average 5 children per family. They have virtually no benefit system, no pension system. Their children are their pension. And so I think in the UK, maybe we have too many options. People, I'm not saying it's all avocado on toast, but I think people are just really not seeing it as a popular option.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain deserves a newsroom that puts the facts and your voice first.
Well, and that's what you get on GB News. Lively debates, lively conversation.
And we're not afraid to hold power to account.
And each other. So join me, Andrew Pearce.
And me, Miriam Cates, for Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. Time is 5:49. You're with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, it's never too early to think about the festive season. And how would you like to have your Christmas on us? This year, that's us at GB News. That's right, 40 grand in tax-free cash at the Christmas of your dreams. And here's the details you need to be our bumper festive winner.
You can win your entire Christmas on us this year, all magically delivered to you in time for the big day. There's cash, £30,000 in tax-free cash to make your new year go with a bang. There's also a further £10,000 to spend on all the gifts, the tree, the trimmings, everything you might need for a fantastic festive day. We've also got Christmas lunch for you, with £1,000 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. And finally, a festive GB News goodie bag, so there's something for everyone under the tree. For another chance to win, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB17 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 28th of November. The winner may be contacted live on GB News, week commencing the 8th of December. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good luck with that. Let's go back now to live pictures from the House of Commons. A short while ago, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, gave a speech, and you can see there she is still addressing the Commons. It was meant to address the serious failings of the BBC, particularly in that Panorama doctored documentary, allegations backed by a BBC whistleblower of editorial bias around trans issues, around the issue of Israel, pro-Palestine, propaganda, some said, being punted out, climate change. Instead, the Culture Secretary addressed those concerns in one sentence. She said the concerns raised are serious. But then she went into what I can only describe as an impassioned defence of the BBC, a monologue, at points sounding, in my opinion, like she was pitching for the job of the next BBC Director General. She went, some of those in the House are going further. saying that the BBC is institutionally biased, she said. Well, an opinion poll today said precisely that thing. In fact, only 19% of the British public believe that the BBC isn't biased. So that's not an alternative view, it's a totally mainstream view. One swept aside by Lisa Nandy. He said we should consider what is at stake. The BBC is not just a broadcaster, she said. It is something we should cherish. It's by far the most trusted and valued of news outlets. At a time when lines are blurred, she said, between fact and polemic, it is time to secure the BBC's future. We will imminently begin the BBC Charter Review, Ms Nandy continued. Of course, that's due in 2027, and by the sounds of it, the Labour Party want to get something nailed on that keeps things going pretty much as they are now. A continuity plan, which will then be cemented in for a further 10 years. Together, we will ensure its funding is sustainable, said Lisa Nandy. It will ensure the BBC remains fiercely independent. I'd like to thank the CEO of News at the place. Our goal is simple, to renew the BBC. Well, here we go. All bets are off. Judith Go is up next. Here is the Queen of Primetime Debate.
Thank you very much, Martin. Great programme as always. So much that we need to discuss. I spoke to a wonderful veteran on my programme today, of course, Armistice Day. We'll take a second to reflect on that. Also, the absolute clown college that we seem to exist in right now. Not one, not two, but another 3 mistaken prisoners on the run. All of that and more. Matt Goodwin, Sebastian Selleck and me in a sec.
Today, clouds overhead, total zen within. Boxed Solar sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello again, very good afternoon to you. I'm here with your GB News weather update from the Met Office. More rain to come for many of us through the next couple of days, and it is staying exceptionally mild for most as well. Currently, we're trapped in a warm sector with a warm front pushing its way northwards across parts of Scotland and a cold front sweeping in from the west. Both these frontal systems, they're bringing a fair amount of rain as we go through the end of today and overnight into tomorrow, but a lot of it is clearing away towards the north and pushing further east. As a result, there will be some drier, clearer weather developing across southern parts of Scotland, northern parts of England and Wales, and also much of Northern Ireland. Where we get these clearer skies, the drier weather, it could turn a little fresh, a little chilly for some, but most places will stay pretty mild. Some places only dropping to around 12 or 13 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow then, it's a wet start across many parts of the south and the southeast. That front lingering here, rainfall totals building up across the southwest in particular, and some strong winds. Also a bit of a damp start across parts of Scotland and the far north of Northern Ireland, but actually in between those two zones of wet weather, well, there's a lot of dry weather to be had first thing, particularly across parts of northern England and the north of Wales. However, as we go through the day, those two wetter zones are going to sandwich together. So the front in the south will be making its way northwards across the Midlands, North Wales and into northern England, and some of that rain in the far north will also push a little bit further southwards as well. So turning cloudier in places where it starts bright, and there'll be some rain arriving too. In the southeast, things could turn a bit brighter later on, and with that mild air still, we're looking at temperatures peaking around 16 Celsius. Later on tomorrow evening, we're going to see that rain across central parts continuing to edge a bit further northwards into the far north of England and southern Scotland later on. As we go through into Thursday, well, it looks a bit mixed. A bit of rain for some, but some dry weather too. Friday, however, cold air in the north and heavy rain in the south.
Today, clouds overhead, total zen within. Boxed Solar sponsors the weather on GB News.
Thank you, Britain, for making us the fastest growing news website in the UK. We're truly humbled, and we couldn't have done it without you.